Mistake at fault is serious in this whole situation, but never classified information is mishandled. I don't have any doubt that this appears to be violent. Well, the issue of question
Recording in progress.
Hello.
About telling us it's snow, I was really listening.
I know.
No, it costs the city money, so I don't say that around Jim and Shauna, but
She said she was gonna walk over.
Allison, just so you know, we are being audio and visually recorded, and we are unmuted.
We are unmuted.
Yes.
everybody
Oh, okay. So we're ready to. Well, look at that.
remember.
Yes. Well, I'm glad everybody got here safely, and I'm hoping Susan was showing up any minute.
All day, yeah. I had to work on my phone.
So it is 6:31. I think we should get started. And I'll begin with the introductions, and by then, the stragglers should be here, right? So welcome, everybody. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee, although we're starting a little early this evening at 6:30. We have one main item tonight, and at the end, a reappointment. So most of the evening's going to be taken up as usual with our zoning conversation. Let me introduce the committee. I am joined at the beginning of the meeting by councilors of Vicky Danberg to my left, your right, who is vice chair of the committee at large from Ward 6. And then on my right is Councilor Holly Ryan, ward councilor for Ward 8, and Councilor Allison Leary, at large from Ward 1. And somewhere, Councilor Baker has joined us, but I think he just stepped out of the room for a moment. Councilor Lyle Baker, ward councilor from Ward 7. Online of the committee, we have Josh Krinsman, who is at large from Ward 4. And we are, and Councilor Wright has joined us as well at large from Ward 3. And we now have a full complement with President Susan Albright joining us at the table, also at large from Ward 2. It looks like we are joined by numerous other councilors this evening. I see Councilor Bill Humphrey, Alicia Bowman, Chris Markowitz, Julia Maliki. How am I doing? Jeff, and Councilor Rick Lipoff, and Councilor Maria Schiavelli Greenberg. I should have mentioned I'm Deb Crossley, chair of the committee, and also at large from Ward 5. As usual, we are joined as well by the planning board. Planning board members, I think we have Mr. Kelly Brown.
We do.
Who is chair of the planning board. Mr. Brown, would you like to introduce your committee? You can unmute.
Yeah, let me
me see if I can find them. I see Peter Doringer from the committee is here. I think I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves if they're here because I don't see everybody.
Sometimes difficult to see everyone on a Zoom.
I don't see anybody else. Is that the whole lineup there?
There is a second.
It's okay.
I'll just take a second to see who else is here from the planning board.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anyone else at the moment, Madam Chair.
Okay, so for the moment, we're joined by Mr. Kelly Brown and Mr. Peter Doringer. And staff here this evening are Director Barney Heath, who's also the ex officio member of the planning board, and Jennifer Kyra, the Deputy Director of Planning.
Thank you.
So we agreed to start early so that we could spend a little time in committee first.
Thank you.
Hearing an update. There was a memo in the packet that just kind of outlined what we've heard so far from the community since version 1 of the zoning ordinance was released. We all okay at the table here? There seem to be a lot of things falling. Okay. And so we're going to get a brief update on, what we've heard from our community involvement since late November. And also, therefore, what kinds of things do we have to focus our work on and further explore in many cases? We'll have time for committee discussion on these items, and then we will resume where we left off at the last committee meeting with the community groups and boards and commissions who signed up to testify this evening. Again, this is not a public hearing, but I will introduce sort of the rules of engagement when we get to that point. So I believe we're going to begin with Ms. Kyra.
Yeah, we have a brief presentation.
Okay, Ms. Kyra, you are on.
Great, thank you. So just going to give a brief sort of update of what we heard through our engagement over the last couple of months. Sorry, there's a cranky toddler. What we heard through our recent engagement around the draft zoning and maps, as well as what we're working on now that we'll be presenting to the committee shortly in the next couple months. So through the end of November, through the middle of December, we held a series of 7 info input sessions based on the proposed maps for the 12 village centers. And everything is available online. So all of the notes and the recordings and the session packets are all on our website here. So what we heard in those sessions, we heard a lot of things. We heard specific map comments, move this boundary here, move that there, remove this, change this from VC3 to 2, from 2 to 3, VC1, et cetera. And then we heard a lot of broader comments. And so you can see all of the map comments online, and we'll go through those in more detail when we present the version 2.0 of the maps later this spring. For now, I'm going to focus on sort of the major themes that are feeding the work that we're doing now. So the main themes we heard from those sessions were, how does this comply with MBTA communities? Concerns about adding more housing, as well as recognizing the great need for more housing, for more affordable housing, for more accessible housing, for smaller housing in walkable areas, how this relates to climate change, and also a desire just to know what will this look like and what could the potential impacts from this be. Historic preservation was a major theme as well, in how does this zoning interact with our existing historic preservation, whether it's a local historic district, a local landmark, or just a building that has some significance that isn't currently protected. And how can we use the zoning to incentivize preservation and reuse rather than demolition? Parking, we heard that there should be more parking, that the parking requirements should be lower, that they could be lower closer to transit. We want to encourage car-free, car-light living, as well as concerns and interest in better understanding how the public parking meets the needs of the village centers, and making sure that there's enough city-provided parking in lots and on the street to serve small businesses. Economic development, recognition that in many areas the businesses could use more customers, and having more foot traffic, having more people living near there could support small businesses, as well as concerns that new development could push some of those businesses out. Design was also a major topic, and lots of questions of what will this look like? What will this look like once it's built out? Is the building height to street width ratio right? Or the building's going to be too tall? How do these buildings transition down into the more residential neighborhoods? Open space was also a major theme throughout the sessions. A strong desire for more public open space, more green space in village centers, more space along sidewalks, more space for outdoor seating, those sorts of things. And the VC1 district, which we've already talked about in committee and spent some more time on, was also one where there was a lot of concern that those metrics get it right, so that this VC1 district can allow for some more housing, hopefully smaller units near the village centers, but that it's in scale with the neighborhood, and it's not too dramatic of a change, and it's not incentivizing tear downs. Special permit thresholds, we heard support for allowing more development to happen by right. And we heard concern for that, for taking away that extra control that the city has through a special permit. And will the zoning ensure that there's quality design still? Zoning for city-owned properties, as well as for churches, came up. How are we dealing with surface parking lots? Ensuring that we're not rezoning municipal buildings, such as schools. And how do we allow churches to adapt over time without, again, incentivizing the demolition? And then there's questions just about the village center locations that were chosen. Why were some areas that are not adjacent to a T chosen, and then other areas such as Chestnut Hill or BC or Woodland were not included? So here are the things we're currently working on in response to many of these themes that we heard. We're working on a rough estimate of the compliance of this first draft with the MBTA communities. It requires some fairly complex modeling. It'll be an iterative process, but we're looking to at least get a sense of how far along does this bring us now. Our intent all along has been that this zoning is what's right for village centers, and that's what's driving it. But this can also help get us towards that compliance number. We don't believe this will fully get us to compliance. So the next step after we get an idea of where we're at is to simultaneously, while moving forward with the village center zoning, look at what the other options are for making up the difference. We've talked about looking at commercial corridors, other T stops that are not considered a village center, like some of those T stations that people brought up during the engagement that we're not looking at right now because they don't really fall into the traditional village center pattern. But they could be a good area to look to see if there's any possibility of including those in some sort of zoning that helps us meet compliance. We're spending a good bit of time really thinking about the VC1 district. How can we balance the goals of allowing for more multifamily housing near village centers and working towards compliance with MBTA communities, but incentivizing the preservation and reuse of existing structures? Similar to that, we're looking at how do we incorporate historic preservation overall. Just showing things on the map, so we're identifying some important resources, providing explanation for how the historic preservation process and the zoning will work together, and then thinking through incentives across the board for reuse of existing structures. We're also working on updated visuals. We heard a lot of interest in seeing modeling, seeing what this is going to look like. So UTIL is working on some updated hypothetical perspective drawings that will look at a few streets within village centers and what it would look like during various stages of build out and when all the zoning regulations and design standards are incorporated. We're also working on a detailed comparison of the village center district to the existing zoning. I think this can help answer some of the questions around things like setbacks, open space. We heard a lot about a desire for more open space in village centers. However, the current zoning isn't requiring any open space, whereas the new zoning would require some. So things like that to provide a more detailed comparison. Parking, we're also looking at should the parking be further refined based on local data that we're getting from existing multifamily buildings, proximity to transit, reuse of a building, or affordability. Looking at whether churches should be treated differently somehow in order to allow for that reuse, but not incentivize demolition. We're also working with the Newton Housing Partnership to look at options for allowing for increased height and or footprint if there's increased affordable housing within a development. And we're looking at ways to fine tune how we approach mixed use. One of the challenges with the MBTA communities is that we can't require mixed use anywhere. So we're currently incentivizing it in the VC3 district, but we want to take a more nuanced approach, look street by street at really where that should be targeted and test whether we think those incentives really will work and lead to the outcome we're hoping for. And whether there should be a special permit option still to deviate from that and allow for all residential. So that's an overview of what we're hoping to be presenting to this committee over the next couple of months, leading up to a version 2.0 of the zoning text and maps that will continue with more analysis and workshopping and ultimately lead to public hearings in the spring, early summer. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Open this up to the committee and council for any, and planning board as well for any comments or questions. Councilor Baker.
So Jen, is it possible to put her timeline back up?
Jen, can you share your screen again, please, and put the timeline back up? This is, by the way, adjusted from the last time we saw by a little over a month, pushing it further forward.
So, Ms. Kyra, you were explaining the various things you're working on, but I just wanted to understand when we see the product of that. You have version 2.0 zoning map and ordinance, and I wasn't quite clear. Is that in February we see that, or is that in March we see that? Because they're two different, you know, the 2.0 is in the March-April zone, so to speak. I'm sorry, bad joke. But it's just helpful to understand the sort of what you intend by these references.
Yeah, so we are aiming to have version 2.0, which is a fully updated draft text and maps in March. We'll be presenting along the way some of those pieces, especially some of the ones that are a little more complex that we want to get some feedback on during the process. So at the next meeting in February, we're hoping to present some of those updated visuals as well as some updated proposals for new metrics for the VC1 district. But we're working through all of these right now and working with UTL, so some of it will depend on when things are available, but we're hoping to be presenting many of these items over February and March.
I guess the point I'm trying to get at is that you've indicated there's, a preview of coming attractions, so to speak, and but obviously the conversation might shape the revised ordinance, and I certainly would expect that, and I applaud the idea of trying to get any public hearing done before the summer, because obviously that once you hit July and August, the affected public and even some affected counselors might not be available, and that's not a good idea. So it's just helpful to understand that. So we're probably going to get some concept report along the lines you talked about in mid-February, right? Before you go to the ordinance, or are we going to have a chance to chew over what that looks like and so it shapes the outcome? Mr. Heath is nodding his head, but the visuals will not report that in the same way I can see it.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump into that. So I think there's a lot to cover there.
Yeah,
And I think we're gonna tackle that starting in February in earnest. And try to tick off each of these as far as we can get before we get to version 2.0. We'd like to have a clear understanding from the committee as to where they're at in terms of the ideas that we have in terms of revising version 1.0. So that would be where we would want to head.
so there was a conversation around that. That's helpful.
We did a similar thing to get here, which was
Right.
develop that framework. And we kind of broke it down into pieces, explained each one, got a feel from the committee before we moved forward. So I'd like to do the same kind of approach.
Okay, and then the other piece that I wasn't quite clear is how the MBTA communities piece. Sort of, because we're on some sort of schedule, as I understand it, that's independent of our own village center operations that have a state deadline of some kind here that we have to be aware of. And I just wasn't quite clear how the MBTA piece is an overlay, whether it's a separate track or part of the same track and where it goes.
Yeah, so see them sort of happening simultaneously. So the village center zoning will certainly be one piece of that. It won't meet everything, so it won't get us to our full unit capacity. We're pretty sure we'll know, we'll have a better idea after we do this first run of the model. But we can keep moving forward with the village center zoning while we come up with ideas for how we can, other areas we might look to, and zoning tools we might use to make up that difference. So that, you're right, is on a similar path to this. It would be, we're supposed to have something adopted by the end of this year. So we'll be providing more information to the committee on that, where we're at, what the sort of options are for how we get the rest of the way there once we've fully worked through the model and how all of the guidelines work together.
When does that part happen? That's not on this track, but it's a little later? Or
No, so we have UTL working on that right now. So I'm not sure exactly when we'll have that. We're hoping soon. I don't think we'll have it for the February 13th meeting, but I'm hoping we can start to discuss those results not too long after that.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, you're welcome. It's all important. Let me just say before I recognize Councilor Albright, and if I could see who's up on the screen wanting to talk, if there's anyone, couple people. Just to make sure everybody remembers, we have 3 meetings already in February, 2 on zoning redesign, our usual meetings, and then we have a committee of the whole with SAP presiding on February 15th, which is a Wednesday, for the specialized code. That's been announced several times, so you may already have it in your calendar. It has been in the calendar online. If the committee feels that we need additional meetings, please think about that, because March is probably the best time to do that before we get into budget season. And there will be a lot of material, so just be thinking about that, because hey, land use meets 3 times a month. We could do that occasionally. So it's a lot of material. It's very interesting, but you know, we would like to try to get through it and get.
Personally, I'm out the 15th in March, if you're thinking about that, but that's another story.
Well, I wasn't thinking necessarily about a particular day at this point, just. So with that, 2 folks who would like to speak online. I'm sorry, and then we have President Albright first, and then Councilor Wright.
So Councilor Baker asked some of my questions, and that the committee will have a chance to discuss, to give feedback on all of the various feedback that we've received. But my other question was, I've heard from some professionals in the field that they're concerned that some of our ideas about you can have a 5th story if you have more affordable housing, or you can have a 5th story if you do X, Y, or Z. I'm wondering if you would have time to consult with folks who would understand the various costs associated with the things that we're asking for, so that we'll have some real solid feedback on that. Yes, Director Heath is saying.
Yes, that's our plan. So we're working with some members of the Newton Housing Partnership who have quite a bit of expertise here, as well as bringing in our economic consultant Landwise, who did some modeling and testing for us previously.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that. Counselor Wright. You need to unmute.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions. Could you go into, this is for Ms. Kyra, a little bit more detailed, the historic preservation. What ideas for creating stronger incentives for the preservation and reuse of significant properties? What are you calling significant properties, and what are some of the ideas that you have in regards to that?
So we're looking at that right now and looking at particularly properties that have some significance. Maybe they're in the National Register, but they're not landmarked or in a local district. We're looking at what, if there are options on some of those properties that they could add on and add development while keeping the building, and how that might work with the zoning. And we're also thinking about what that designation is, so that it's not providing a strong incentive for demolition, and what sort of things do we need to exempt them from in order to make it attractive to reuse the existing building. So that would be some of the dimensional controls. Like if you're keeping the building, not going to hold you to some of the dimensional controls that you may not be able to meet. Parking is a big one. Many of those sites are fairly built out, so they may need some parking relief. Things like that. And we're also looking at, can there be a little extra footprint that you can add on just to account for some things, like particularly in the VC1, where you're looking at older homes that might convert into, a few units. They might need a little extra space for circulation and egress. So what is that right footprint that you can add on? How far back does it need to be from the front facade in order to make it actually viable to keep the building and convert it?
So have you or UTIL make the calculation of what percent of build out for that lot to preserve that house versus tearing down and just building new, which is cheaper and easier to do? So I would expect that one of the incentives is that you can build out on that lot more so than you could if you do a tear down. And have you made that calculation to see where that cutoff point is?
We haven't made that calculation yet. That's one of the things we're working on and thinking about. Do you get more if you keep the building than if you build new? We have Landwise, again, our economic consultant that is going to be looking at some of this. We also had a good discussion with the building professionals around this topic, and they were going to spend some time thinking about it, and we're going to regroup with them. So we don't have the answer yet, but we're working to try and figure out that balance. The other complicating factor is we're confirming exactly what we can count towards MBTA communities compliance. We don't know that we can count something that only allows existing buildings to convert. So that's also a factor. We want to incentivize the preservation, but we also, want to keep making progress towards that unit capacity number.
Are you looking, I have some ideas, like if to preserve it, you can keep the present house and add 50% or up to 4,000 square feet footprint, whichever's less, versus if you tear down, you only allowed 2,500 square feet as a footprint.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking at right now. We're trying to find that right number.
Okay. The next question, in your memo under mixed use versus residential, which you didn't talk to tonight, is applying to streets outside the VC3 districts, such as Watertown Street and Nonantum. What did you mean by that? And
So
what kind of areas were you looking at? Because you're applying outside the villages and for instance, Nonantum doesn't even have transit at all. And so you're saying 5 stories outside of that.
no, that's not what I'm saying. So right now, how we're dealing with the mixed use and with MBTA communities. So as you know, MBTA communities doesn't allow us to require mixed use and still comply. There are areas where we want to make sure we're getting mixed use and we're getting that ground floor commercial space is really important. Those tend to be the village centers where you have some element of VC3 in the core for the most part. So the way we did it there was allowing 4.5 stories by right for mixed use and just 2.5 by right for residential. Now, through all of our conversations, engagement, discussion with ward counselors, there are other areas where we want to make sure stay mixed use, Watertown Street and Nonantum being a good example. However, that is currently only proposed for VC2, which we think in general is appropriate. So what are our options there? Since that's outside the half mile of transit anyway, do we just require it on that street since we can't likely count that area towards MBTA communities anyway? We also want to take a closer look at the VC3 areas. Are all of those areas zoned VC3 areas that we really want to prioritize mixed use, or should it be street by street rather than just by district? We've also heard some feedback that we should still allow for a fully residential project, that is appropriate mixed in to some of those areas. So maybe that's by special permit. So it's just sort of taking our approach towards mixed use and making it a little more nuanced and taking a closer look at it.
And a quick question going back, when you released version 1, VC2 was 3.5 stories for both
Correct.
residential and mixed
Right.
use. And did you mean that, or they could do?
Yeah, because we
Okay.
don't think, in general, the VC2 are the areas where it's less critical that there's a ground floor commercial outside of certain areas such as Watertown Street and Nonantum. So that's why we didn't do the 3.5, and it would be 1.5 in that case, because from our analysis, you need the 2-story differential to really make it more worthwhile. So that's why I'm saying we need to take another look at how we approach it.
Okay. The next thing on parking, can you explain a little bit more detail what you're thinking about? You talked about tier-based parking on proximity to transit.
Yeah, so this is something that has come up in discussions in committee as well as through our engagement is that parking ratio right? Maybe it should be a little lower. I know there's some that think it should actually be higher, but the data we're seeing from local projects is skewing lower. And there's, also, I think, a rationale for tying it to proximity to transit. Like I said before, it could also be something that's, really critical to preservation and reuse of existing buildings, relief on parking. And what we've heard from affordable housing developers is that it could be even lower for affordable units.
Okay. Okay, that's it for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ray. Mr. Dorringer from the Planning Board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jen, your comment about the MBTA communities not allowing for mixed use, you can't require mixed use zoning. And it occurred to me, whether it's mixed use or something else that might not be allowed, my recollection is that we're actually running a 2-option zoning. One is the village center zoning and the other option is the existing zoning. And I was wondering whether it was possible to, for example, require mixed use zoning in the existing zoning for the same, in that option for village centers, so that you might be able to, for a developer who didn't want the village center option to be required to put in mixed use.
So we actually do for much of the village center. So our business zones currently require a special permit to have ground floor residential. The issue being they don't meet the other requirements, right? Allowing for enough density by right, those sorts of things. So we'd have to change quite a bit of the underlying zoning at the same time.
So does that mean that the underlying zoning option really can't be changed or is going to have to be changed at the same time that we're working with the village center zoning?
Our intent was not to change the underlying zoning. It was just to propose the overlay district.
Okay. But that other option is still under consideration, the two option arrangement.
To also change the underlying zoning?
Well, that was my thought is, could you tinker with the underlying zoning since you can't accomplish what you want? If you had a situation where you couldn't accomplish what you wanted because of the MBTA community restrictions, could you at least address some of those issues through the existing zoning?
I mean, in theory, we could, but we would be changing the existing zoning probably to look a lot like the village center zoning, except for that mixed use piece.
Sounds like a big piece of work. Director Heath would like to address this question.
Yeah,
also.
this is theoretically, I think it's hard for people to visualize this a little bit, but it's all about the capacity. So the fact that we'll have a property that has an option to go under the current zoning or the new zoning, the fact that there's new zoning that allows for a certain amount of density and height associated with it, that's the capacity piece. So property owners could choose to stay with the current zoning they have. We still get quote unquote MBTA credit for having that additional capacity as an option.
So I just want to say there's a lot of folks on this screen and the next one who haven't been to one of these meetings before. I do always read the names. And so I just want to make sure folks understand that we have two projects going on here. One is the village center zoning that we started in the city of Newton at the beginning of 2021 for our own sake to solve problems, or striving to solve problems that we have in our village centers and to try to get the right mix and the right density in our village centers. On top of that, a year later, the state passed what's called the MBTA Communities Law, which requires us to enable through our zoning the development of a certain minimum number of housing units within close proximity to public transportation. 90% of them have to be within a half mile of public transportation. And that at a minimum density, the minimum density is 15 units per acre. Of course, we can go anywhere we want from there, but so we're trying to layer the state rules on top of what we think is best for our village centers and our village center economies and our village center places. And then what we're pretty sure, as Jen said earlier, we're not going to be able to meet those requirements, those state requirements, just with the village center zoning that we're doing. So we're going to have to look to other parts of the city, and we're starting to do that, or the consultant, I should say, is starting to do that now and in the next couple of months, so that we can begin to look at both simultaneously at some point. So I'm hoping that makes sense to folks who I see names who have never been to one of our meetings, or not in the recent past anyway. Is there anyone else from the committee or the council? Councilor Baker?
I don't want to preclude my colleague. I guess the one thing that I'm not sure that we have fully discussed, or the consultant has, is the idea that there might be some places where you actually, for example, in historic structures, leave them alone. In other words, not rezone them to a more intense use. I know the model that's being considered is to somehow provide incentives for breaking them up inside and preserving the exterior. But at the same time, I think that part of the concern that I'm hearing from people in the community is that what we're risking is the chance of having kind of monolithic dimensional outcomes, where in fact the village centers themselves have variegated heights and areas and places. So perhaps this is something that you get into in more detail when you get to the fine tuning, but the basic model, and for people who haven't been part of this conversation before, was sort of densest in the center, less dense as you go out, and then feathering out to the least dense for the village center zoning, which itself is more dense than what's beyond it. But there may be some value to at least some limited quilting, so to speak. And I don't know where that would be, but I think we're going to hear about that when we get into the map design, as all these things. So I'm not sure where our consultant, Mr. Util, the Util firm is on that question, but I didn't want to leave it because there may be a place and time in the whole conversation that we say, well, wait a minute, maybe we should not do anything in this particular area. So.
Well, I like that word quilting, actually. It's something I was thinking about in between, between our last meeting and now. We've had every weather pattern you can imagine. And we had a really beautiful sunny day shortly after our last meeting. So I went to West Newton and I stood in front of Judith's Bakery and looked back at the village center. And that quilting thought. So our churches and synagogues and temples and things are mostly quite historically significant, right? You can imagine that those are not going to go anywhere in the near future. They do sometimes close their doors, but what we're intending is to allow them to change their use by right. Let's say they stay. Public buildings would stay, public parks would stay. There's a landmark building as you look down West Newton between where the roads split off, where you go either Watertown Street or Washington, thank you. How could I forget? Anyway, so I thought of, okay, so what could change here? And I started looking at the buildings in between. So it will really be, and of course it also happens over time. So that idea of quilting, actually, I think, I like that word. I think it's going to happen naturally because, we have so many variable sizes of lots and shapes of buildings, and some that are truly historic, some that are maybe just first floor retail like we have in Newton Center.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
As I understand it from the prior presentations, the underlying zoning remains the same and the new zoning drops on as an overlay. And then the property owner has an election. Right now, some property owners may elect and others may not. And I guess part of the challenge of this process is that we're in some cases we might applaud the decision made, right? And so the question, if you leave it all under that, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see how this plays out. The other comment I just want to make is that the map we went through with Mr. Heath and his colleagues in the department on individual, but there were places in the VC3 that looked to me, and even some VC2, where existing perfectly decent housing was already operational. And the question is, do you need to take that out of service to make it more intense, as opposed to some commercial area where you want to add housing? So again, part of the challenge of the much more detailed analysis is going to be, I think, to have a sense of these contexts and how they work. And it may be that we're going to have to take one sort of chunk and sort of look at it really carefully, like West Newton. That's it's all right. It's clumsy in my old age. Unfortunately, it's just water. But to figure out how this all plays out. Anyway, thank you.
Okay.
We're all thinking.
But it's clumsy.
See how it plays out, yeah. Councillor Wright, you have your hand up, and then we do want to move back to the public.
Yes, Madam Chair. I just want to point out, I mean, if the village centers were owned by a lot of different landlords, I think it would be redeveloped at different times, but many of the villages are owned by two landlords, like West Newton and like Newton Center. And yes, there's a couple people that might own a building here or there, but a lot of it is owned just by one or two people. So once they decide that they want to change, I think you'll see change much, much quicker. Thank you.
Look at ownership patterns, but I'm not sure that a lot of it is a correct phrase, Director Heath.
Yeah, so we've spoken to some of the owners. A lot of the owners have long-term leases as well and long-term tenants. So while they may be under ownership, I know, for example, Newton Highlands, I think, has 5 kind of ownership groups. A lot of those folks have long-term leases that are in place, and they at least indicate they don't really have any intention at this point to do anything to jeopardize those long-term leases. So I guess it's complicated. I think there's a story to tell with each owner and each building in terms of where they're at in the life cycle of things.
Yeah, well, for instance, in West Newton, on where the cinema block, Mr. Korf is buying up all those properties and giving them just like 3-year leases or tenant at will and things like that. So there's, even though he has the Santander building, the next 3 buildings he does have plans for. So
And that's happening under the current zoning.
Yep. I just want to bring up though that it's not like it's a gradual one by one for some of the village centers. There's some of them only have 1 or 2 owners. Thank you.
I'm not sure that we can project that as a way things are going to happen or not going to happen. I mean, you're right. There is a developer buying up contiguous parcels in West Newton, but the only solution for that developer right now is to ask for a change of zone. And that's going to be a zone that's likely MU4 is the next one, which would allow more than what we're proposing to allow by right here. So, I think we have to have a, I don't want to, how do I say this? A whole sentence. We have to say, well, yeah, okay, this is happening, but under the current zoning, it's going to go this way, and versus under the proposed zoning, it would go another way.
Could I just add,
Yes,
that
please.
we've had MU4 since 2015, and so far we have 2
Developed.
developed. We have one that's on kaput.
Yep.
So that's how fast zoning changes things.
Yes.
Slowly, very
Slowly.
slowly.
The other thing that I think Yushiel has mentioned to us a few times, it's an interesting way to look at the proposed zoning, is that it actually provides a cap. So, I think, and we've talked about this in committee a few times, just for folks who are watching, if we have 2.5, 3.5, or 4.5 stories by right, and those are maximums, a developer coming in is going to have a much stronger rationale for asking for an MU4 or BU4 or some other, larger opportunity.
So I just want to make a point though, that maybe what has been built so far has not been that much, but both the planning department and then I've been tracking on top of it. Since 2020, we have in the pipeline that's going through land use, about to get to land use, that has been approved over 3,500 units, which is over 11% of our present number of housing in the city. And that's just from 2020. So even though we haven't really seen all of these up and running, it's in the pipeline. In the next few years, you're going to see quite a few opening up. So I don't see that as a gradual thing, increasing your housing by 11% over a couple of years. That to me is like a step function. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else want to speak to this portion of the meeting, which actually is council?
I just want to say 3,500 might be a number that scares some people. Some people might say, yay, we're getting more housing. But Councilor Wright, could you email the planning department your 3,500 number and confirm with them that we're on the right track here with that number?
Yes, well, 2,500 actually was provided by Ms. Kyra back in June, and I can forward that. And then since then, our things that are 40Bs in land use, been approved by land use, about to go into land use. So I will forward that to planning, but yes.
I think if you talk to Councilor Lipoff, about this, and maybe he's here tonight and he can speak to this, but I think that the number of requests for permits to the land use committee has been shrinking. And I just had a conversation with him about that last week, I think it was. So we should, be clear on which direction things are going.
I mean, I have a spreadsheet right in front of me. I'm looking at it with the units. So yes, I will provide that to planning and where those numbers are.
Thank you, Councilor Wright. I see we have 2 more hands up. And I just want to say, I sort of promised people a hard stop at 7:30 so we could go into public, but Councilor Bowman and Councilor Gentile, welcome.
Thank you. I'm just going to real quick in response to what we just heard from Councilor Wright. Many of those units, if we're talking about what's at Riverside or Northland or others, are years away. I mean, Riverside's not even working right now and could be 10 years away for those units being open. So yes, they may be on the books, but it doesn't mean that they're going to show up all of a sudden, that they still, even though they're permitted, they still could be 10 or more years out, or could not end up being done at all. I mean, that's the real risk that I think we face here is Dunstan East is permitted and not moving. Riverside's permitted and not moving. So yeah, I think that's where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bowman, Councilor Gentile, and then Lipoff.
So since people seem to be jumping in and being critical or questioning Councilor Wright's statement, I've seen the list. I've talked to her about it. She's the one person that does her homework as much as anybody on this council. And when I have a question on something like this, I'll ask her, and she sends along information, and she's 100% correct. All she said is that we have approved, the city council, close to 2,500 units, and there's another 1,000 units in the pipeline that you would all, if you looked at them, you'd say, yeah, those stand a pretty good chance of being approved. That's what she said. That represents 11% increase. Whether you like it or not, it's factually correct, okay?
Let's see. Mr. Heath, did you want?
Yeah, I mean, let's state the obvious, which is the big ones are Northland and Riverside. So that takes up, 800, and Riverside's another 500. So there's 1,300. I'd have to take a look at the other ones. They must be a combination of 40B projects, because I'm racking my brain for special permit projects that are that big. And there's little discretion, the city can apply to 40B projects with respect to modifying, the design and the numbers. So, and that's a function of the state law. So happy to take a look at it.
Thank you, Director Heath, Councilor Lipoff, and then Dan Burke.
Councilor Bowman said one of the things I wanted to say. Actually, Councilors Wright and Gentile are correct, and so are Councilor Bowman, myself, and Mr. Heath when we say, that's a big number when you think about it. The majority of those units are on 3 or 4 properties. And yes, it will take a very long time to bring those to finish. So everybody's right here. It's the fear of that number as if it's going to happen overnight and as if it's happening strewn through the entire city when it's really condensed on a few lots. So nobody's arguing about the numbers. I think what we're trying to put out is the reality of what that number is and where they are and how long it will take to bring them online. And it comes down to a difference in opinion. Some people want to bubble wrap this city. Others want to see it developed, and some in between want to, contain some type of hold on how we do that. And I think together we can all get to that place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lipoff, and Councilor Dan Burke.
I just wanted to add one comment about the ease or difficulty of combining parcels. And it was mentioned that Newton Center has 2 landlords, I just counted 13 that I know of, and I don't know of them all. And that's one of the reasons why places like Newton Center haven't had development. And it will continue to be a challenge because the people who own properties or haven't been inclined to cooperate with one another. So I think that we're going to get eventually, if there is any development, it'll be very patchwork.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Not seeing any more burning desire to comment, so,
Yes, I have one burning desire.
oh, I'm sorry, Counselor Gentle, I thought I didn't see your hand again.
You know, I'm not the one that questioned council rights numbers, okay? But some people on the council did that. And even the planning director seems to find it, the number might be a little excessive. The number isn't excessive. You can justify it or explain it away as much as you want. I certainly understand how 40B works. No one is suggesting that the city should be bubble wrapped, Council Lipoff. No one has suggested that ever. That's a poor term. But 3,500, 2,500 since 2020, that's a lot of units to be approved, and you can't just ignore it. You got to, you have to admit that the units are coming, whether it's in 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years, they're approved. And it's an unprecedented number of units and percentage that we have seen here in Newton, at least in my 40 years of being involved with local politics.
All set?
Thank you.
All righty, and Counselor Lipoff.
Just a quick response to that. Councilor Gentile, I'm not saying you've said that. When you're chair of land use, you get a ton of emails from people that would like nothing done. That's the frustration that we have with every petition. We try to listen to the neighborhood. We try to get them on board. It's not always possible. And quite often when you sit on land use, I don't know if you ever have, Councilor Gentile, but you get a lot of bubble wrap emails. So that, yes, that's stuck in my head. I'm not saying anybody on this Zoom right now who's a member of the council has ever said that to me. Thank you.
Yes, President Albright.
So to Councilor Wright and to Councilor Gentile, I may be the only one who misunderstood Councilor Wright's statement. Because I know very well that we've got Riverside coming and we've got Northland coming, we've got other things coming. What I heard, and maybe what others heard, was that we have 3,500 new units in the pipeline coming to land use. And I couldn't figure that out because it makes no sense to me. And so if that's not if Councilor Wright was talking about those things that have been approved over the last several years, that's a different story. And so for anybody else who misinterpreted as I did, that these are not 3,500 units of new projects coming to land use. That's what I'd like to clear up. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I just speak to that?
Well, I was going to take Counselor Leary first.
Okay.
And then, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. When I heard the 3,500 number, I was thinking that's terrific. We're finally getting our act together. It's a long, long time coming that we've actually produced any significant housing. I think about the economic health of our city. I think about our dwindling school enrollment. I think about those projects are thoughtfully done. Many of them are special permits. And I think they're building in the right places. And I rarely question Councilor Wright's numbers because she absolutely does do her homework. And I respect very much the work she does on that. So I just want to throw that out there. And I'm looking forward to zoning reform because I look at Nonantum and it's literally like someone took a jigsaw puzzle and threw it in the air and said, there's your zoning in Nonantum. So remember that it's going to be more thoughtful. It's going to be, people are going to know what to expect. There's a lot of good things coming from this zoning. And a lot of the problems that people complain about now are all under our current zoning, which is very frustrating. So I just want to throw that out there as we continue our many years long discussion on zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Leary. Counselor Wright, did you want to say anything still?
Yeah, just real quick. Yeah, I'm sorry if you misinterpreted. Like I said, I was looking at the planning department memo of what's been approved or pending approval, which was 2,500, and then the other ones, that was since June, and then since June, what's in the pipeline, some of them have been approved, some are 40B or whatever, and it's, you know, it's another 1,000. But I will provide this information to planning.
Okay. All right, it's almost exactly 7:30, and I did promise we were going to get to public statements by then, so here we are, right on time. I'm going to give a brief statement to start us off, as I did last time, especially because we have a lot of new folks here tonight, and then the sort of rules of engagement. So, as we said earlier, since the beginning of 2021, we've been engaging the community in many ways, planning staff and UTIL and many counselors who have become part of this process. And so at this point, and for quite a while now, we have had many boards, commissions, and neighborhood associations, neighborhood councils, and some citizens organizations who have been very consistently studying our work and providing constructive criticism, some for quite some time, and useful feedback along the way. So that's why we have given over all of last meeting and the majority of tonight's meeting, a chance for those community organizations to speak to us directly. But I'm going to emphasize again, you heard it earlier with Ms. Kyra's talk, this is not a public hearing. The public hearings come when we have a completed product ready to formally put before the public. This is to get feedback. This is another step in the process to get more feedback that we can use to revise and refine the zoning. And that is both the text and the design controls within the text and the mapping. So we noticed from the first time we had this that several of the groups we hadn't heard of in the past. So for the record, we wanted to make sure we know who is speaking to us, who they represent, what the mission of the group is, and when it was formed. So we know who's talking to us, and so we asked for and received. Oh, I don't think I have. Do you have that paper? Yeah. I don't have the most recent one. Thank you. Short descriptions of each group from the group itself. If we didn't get one, we're going to ask you to begin your, I think there's one or maybe two who did not provide a description. So we're going to ask you to provide that description at the beginning. So I'm going to read into the record what people provided to us. Our clerk will keep time. Each group gets 4 minutes. This time, I think we thought it might be helpful if she gives a 30-second warning, some kind of a ding or something. We'll know it when we hear it, so that you know where you are in your time slot. I understand some groups have more than one speaker and they're doing 2 minutes apiece, that sort of thing. So that's fine. Committee members may ask questions, counselors may ask questions to clarify, for clarification, but we would like to get through the testimony and for the most part have our in-committee and in-council conversation when the statements are concluded. We actually have 13 groups tonight, 2 have dropped out. So I'm going to begin. The groups were given an order in which they would be speaking, so you're prepared somewhat. But the first group did drop out, so we would start with the second group, which is the Glenwood Ridge Neighbors, represented by Norma Swenson. Glenwood Ridge Neighbors was established many decades ago to give those living in close proximity a way to be in touch about issues of common concern regarding our life here. Includes approximately 60 addresses on Ridge Avenue, Glenwood Avenue, and a few abutters on Parker Street. This group was participated in the recent zoning engagement project and at its annual block party distributed ZAP literature and carried on discussions with party attendees. Ms. Swenson, are you available to speak to us now?
Yes, if you can hear me.
Oh, very well, thank you.
Oh, good.
Can we just see the person?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we've got you now. Go ahead.
All right. My name is Norma Swenson. I live on Ridge Avenue, Newton Center. I've been living in the city of Newton since 1950. I have a public health background, and I'm also one of the founders of Our Bodies Ourselves. I was asked to provide that information in the interests of transparency. So this is who I am. And I'm here tonight to urge the city to call a moratorium on any additional planning until some definitive proposals or recommendations are available to us in writing about whether or how trees and green spaces will be zoned in the new, denser Newton Village centers that you now envision. For several years, most people, when asked, have said they want more trees and more green spaces, not less. They've also said that they prefer building heights to be no more than 3, maybe 4 stories, not higher. There's a connection between these two concerns, and if I can, I'd like to illuminate that. Many people have asked our planners for months when we'll be able to see their recommendations for green spaces and trees, and the answers usually are, all that will be taken care of later. I think there is some confusion and conflation between open spaces and green spaces, and between landscaping and trees. Street trees and shade trees are a tree canopy. I even heard urban tree canopy somewhere lately. I hope not. Urban is not what we are, and most people do not wish to be urbanized. These are not the same things. Developers are mostly concerned with setback and height and sidewalks, space between buildings and so forth, and the rest they leave up to good landscapers who will work with whatever they have left in order to provide usually a few short trees on the sunny side, flowers in season. But shade trees are seen more like obstacles, occupying land and space that will mostly have to be cut down to make room for more buildings. And the cry for more open spaces and community meeting spaces has often been met even today by simply paving over the shady space between the buildings. This is not green space. I submit that the overlays we all work with are in the reverse order from what they ought to be. The first overlay, which now shows only the built structures, the roads and the sidewalks, should instead be a green overlay, which shows where the shade trees are and will be, and where green open spaces would work best once the trees are placed and buildings built. We could call this first overlay green first or trees first, the one that shows where the green is and will best be placed when the work is done. Depending on the size of the lot, builders should be required to work with arborists as well as landscapers and plan the trees and green spaces first and not the other way around, followed by size, shape, and design of their buildings. Under new zoning, most buildings in our village centers will be too tall to provide enough light to grow any serious tree that could shade a building. To the heat island effect already predicted, we will now add the canyon effect of deep shadows most of the year, if proposed densities are actually built. Others believe that just investing in street trees will provide whatever is needed, but this is not true. Street trees are absolutely essential for many reasons. Few new street trees today are shade trees. We still have a considerable canopy that we've tried to preserve, but much of it is on private property or in our public parks, including many of these Vest Pocket parks scattered around the city. Other cities and towns around us, Brookline and Cambridge, to name two, have long since done their studies and are trying to take the steps to make certain developers will have to plan to include serious shade trees and green spaces. Is someone trying to speak to me?
Yes, we gave you the 30-second warning about a minute ago, and so we're hoping you could wrap it up and.
I certainly can do that. I also want to talk about Boston and Philadelphia, even some time ago, have adopted green infrastructure plans that will ensure the provision of some additional shade trees, but the adoption of
Ms. Swenson.
replacing concrete infrastructure. Where is Newton? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we are going to try to be louder next time, so we want everybody to take the same amount of time. Please do.
That's perfectly right.
Yeah, please submit your comments to us, and you know, I know any of us would be happy to have a follow-up conversation with you as well. The next group.
Madam Chair, can I quickly clarify something?
Yes, please.
I think there is some confusion around the topic of open space. So the zoning, proposed zoning is only for privately owned parcels and potentially some city surface parking lots. It will not rezone or allow any new development on any city parks or green space, open spaces. If you look at the core of the village centers, the green spaces that exist are city-owned properties. There is not on the privately owned parcels, parks. Buildings are coming right up and touching each other. They're small lots. The buildings are taking up most of the lot. This wouldn't be removing green spaces or trees from those lots. What it would be doing is including a new requirement to have some public open space. Now that may be plazas, just given the sort of nature of the core of these village centers. And that might be treated differently in the more residential areas. That's one of the things we're really working on with the VC1 is how open space treated differently. But I do think there's been a lot of confusion around this potentially removing green space and public parks and things, which it will not do.
Thank you for that, Ms. Kyra. Mr. Heath would also
Yeah,
like
just
to.
real quick, I want to address the city's overall philosophy about streetscapes in general. So I'll just use West Newton as an example. When we did West Newton Square, there were a total of 8 trees in West Newton Square that still survived. It's from the last version of the streetscape. We added 88 trees. We did a similar thing in Newtonville. When we go in and do public streetscapes projects, we try to significantly upgrade the green infrastructure. So I just wanted to put that on the table.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarifications, and I've heard some of this in community meetings myself, that the BU1 and the BU2 zones that we have currently defining our village centers don't require any green space on or open space on private properties. So this does have to be in order to get the kind of outdoor gathering spaces that people and to keep the ones we have and to improve them. It has to be a collaboration between, with the city. It's the city that has to plan or master plan the village centers to make sure we have the kind of green space and open space that we want. Okay, thanks for that. I'm glad you stopped me because this was what we did last time too, is that if to maybe correct any misunderstandings for everybody who's listening.
Could I just make a comment?
Yes, please, Councilor Leary.
Mrs. Swenson, first of all, thank you for your service. You're quite an impressive woman. And when I'm looking at the new zoning, I see tremendous opportunities for more sustainability measures, everything from more green space to stormwater to much more climate resilience. I think there's a huge opportunity there. And that's just want you to know that's one of my main focuses with the new zoning is to make big improvements over our old zoning. Didn't really have any of those concerns in mind. So thank you very much for your comments.
And thank you, but let me be clear, I'm speaking about requirements for developers. I'm not speaking about public property. We could talk about private property, but not tonight.
All right, thank you very much. Councilor Laredo, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief, but since both the planning department and you have felt necessary to correct or to advise the last speaker about facts, I will point out that in V1, by allowing a developer to build a much bigger footprint, you are going to cut back on open space. And certainly in V1, especially V1 now, where you may have a 1 or 2 family home with a significant amount of open space, if you allow greater development, you will have less open space. And I think that point deserves clarification and correction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Let's move on to the Woburn Area Council, which is one of 4 neighborhood area councils promulgated through Newton City Charter in 2013. They, I should say, act as intermediaries between the city council and the residents of our respective catchment area. In this case, approximately 5,645 residents. They meet monthly and host forums to engage and educate residents of pending city actions. One of their many responsibilities is to serve in an advisory role for the mayor and city council on planning and zoning actions, they say. I'm reading their description. So who is, I see Raina Getz' name here. Are you prepared?
Yep, this is me. Hi. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Raina Getz, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Woburn Area Council. Our comments and requests are based on one-on-one conversations with Woburn residents and the results of our recent survey, which to date has received 325 unique responses. Survey responders were clear. First, they do not understand the proposed rezoning. Second, a majority do not support it. Here are the results. 19% of residents are simply unaware of this proposed rezoning. Additionally, 31% feel as if they do not fully comprehend the changes. A majority do not support the proposed designations in the draft map for Woburn Village Center. 53% do not support, 16% support, and 30% feel insufficiently informed to respond. Removing this pool results in 75% of the respondents who do not support the current draft map for Woburn Village Center. A majority do not support the inclusion of the new zoning in the zoning ordinance. 55% do not support, 15% are supportive, and 30% feel insufficiently informed to respond. Removing this pool results in 79% of informed respondents who do not support the proposed rezoning. Since the release of the proposed zoning and draft maps 2 months ago, the onus of its interpretation has inappropriately shifted to the residents, with very few who understand the language of setbacks and by right development. To address this void, we commenced informational forums and 3D visualizations. Please visit our website at woburnariacouncil.com to review this material. Feedback from our residents is even more specific. Engaged residents do not see the correlation between their submitted vision kits and the feedback tool submissions and the current zoning proposals and draft maps. Rezoned property owners and their abutters are genuinely concerned about what this will mean for their daily lives, from the size and massing of buildings on neighborhood streets to traffic and congestion and parking on immediate village streets. If Barney Heath appreciates the need to assess the impact of the proposed zoning on residents' quality of life and their property values, then please provide this assessment. In summary, as the city pursues this significant transformation of our village centers, let me repeat, this significant transformation of our village centers with limited residential engagement or without providing clarity, we Woburn residents have 3 specific requests. Engage residents in a meaningful way, present realistic visualizations, and provide 3D modeling. If Boston can provide 3D modeling for its residents, then we can too. More importantly, show us what good looks like with a clear example of a community that has gone through similar rezoning and emerged even more vibrant and affordable. This is an essential request. Timeline. Drive the process by how many people understand and support the proposed rezoning and its siting rather than some arbitrary timeline. Listen to the residents. We are the most vested party with intimate knowledge of our community and our villages. Residents' opinions are to be valued and respected. With a majority of our survey residents opposed to the current plans, we interpret this to mean we need to pause, reevaluate, and re-engage with the community in a meaningful way. Today, Woburn Village Center is vibrant. We know only of one vacancy in our commercial blocks, and that is due to a relocation of an existing business. Besides a post office, bank, nail salons, realtors, Woburn Village Center also has a coffee shop and independent mom and pop businesses, such as a shoe cobbler, tailor, dog groomer, and a hardware store. We have businesses that have thrived in our village center for decades, such as a local ethnic market, a frame shop, and even a Jewish deli that has served as a much-loved destination, now celebrating this year its 52nd year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Getz, right on time. Appreciate that. Question for clarification, President Albright.
I have a question for you, Ms. Getz. Would it, if, I'm not sure what materials we have that would explain the zoning, the village center zoning, but since you have a mailing list to send a survey out to, and since many of those people don't know what's going on, would you be willing to send materials out to your survey list so that they could find out what's going on?
Oh, absolutely. And we've been holding these informational sessions for quite a while. And we willingly invite the planning department to come in, as you, Chair Crossley, did at the Upper Falls meeting. We really need to expand our presentations to the community. I mean, this was a shocker to me because I just sort of feel as if most people on the, if you approach a resident, they do not know that this is going on.
So it would be great to have you be an arm of getting information out to the community that way.
Right.
Of course. Yep. Gladly.
Thanks so much. Okay. Seeing no one else, I have next, I don't have a description of this group coming from the Newton Area Council. I see that Jennifer Bentley is presenting. Ms. Bentley, can you please give us a description of who is the Newtonville Area Councils for everybody's benefit? When were you formed and what is your mission?
It's basically the same description you just had for the Woburn Area Council, except Newtonville. So you guys all heard that one. It's the same thing. Again, we work with our residents to be a conduit between you and our the city council and our residents. So that's our job.
Please go ahead.
Ready?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. My name is Jennifer Bentley. I'm the president of the Newtonville Area Council. We have spent the majority of our summer and fall meetings discussing this topic, including encouraging people to fill out the community engagement survey, and have gathered many comments from them on their first impression of the draft village center zoning overlays you have introduced. We spent a lot of time and resources with a certified urban planner professional to create renderings of the full build out and vision of these overlays, but unfortunately we were told we cannot present these at the forum, which I think is a disservice to our democratic, transparent process. Without these visual aids, it's hard to present the full impact of the design of the draft on Newtonville, but I'll try to make several points, drive our point home. Newtonville has a population of more than 4,300 people who live north and south of Washington Street. Ours is an economically diverse community and contains one of 4 local historic districts. It already has a vibrant, distinctive village center, which according to your zoning map has become the target of some of the most aggressive upzoning in the city. The first point is we're not truly a transit-oriented village center. Newtonville and the north side of the city have taken the brunt of developer speculations, tear downs, and constructions for far too long under the mistaken concept that this is a location suitable for transit-oriented development. In reality, we don't have the Green Line. The Newtonville commuter rail stations are inaccessible. The express bus service has been curtailed, and there's virtually no crosstown bus service. Newtonville can hardly be called a suitable transit-oriented community, and to densely zone it that way is disingenuous to the true meaning of transit-oriented development. In stark contrast to this plan to continue to overdevelop Newtonville, the area around Chestnut Hill Green Green Line T-stop, which has ample parking, a nearby grocery store, CVS, health center, the street, all within walking distance, isn't even being considered as a village center. It has not been slated for any upzoning within a half a mile of an active, convenient T-stop. Second, this zoning will significantly impact our thriving local businesses, but not in a good way. In past meetings, Councilor Downs has envisioned village centers as a place where in a 15-minute walk, residents can do most of their errands on foot without needing to rely on cars. Newtonville Village Center already meets that criteria, offering banks, a pharmacy, bakery, clothing, gift store, laundromat, nail salon, hair salon, a post office, dry cleaner, tailor, supermarket, toy store, and a variety of restaurants and food locations. Many of our businesses participate in the Newtonville Village Day, which attracted over 4,000 residents last year. And then there's the Bramway, a seating and meeting area behind the stores on Walnut Street on Austin that encourages people to patronize local coffee shops and other shops and socialize. Nonetheless, after reaching out to them, a number of our village independent retailers have told us they would not survive the kind of disruption caused by the construction phase of development, and they are very fearful about the rents they would face in the new buildings. They do not have the resources to relocate, nor do we want to lose them. And recently, Artitudes in West Newton announced its closing after 19 years because it could not survive the reduction in parking and the anticipated disruption due to planned development. On behalf of Newtonville's residents and businesses, we ask that you preserve rather than destroy our village. Third point is that, if you build it, they will come. Basically, we are saying that, I know that a lot of the planning department has said multiple times that, that they will not build anything out all at once. And I know it was just said again tonight, but we think that this is going to happen and it's going to be realized in the next decade of Newtonville. In closing, Newtonville attracts a wide intergenerational cross-section of community, students, and young parents, and children and local business people, taking advantage of our many amenities. Newtonville already has the criteria for a vibrant, walkable village center. Let's not destroy it with this zoning plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bentley. Any questions for clarification? Okay. Next, we have several Newtonville groups. This one is Neighbors for a Better Newtonville, represented by Margaret Ward and Robert Kavanaugh. This is a citizen committee formed in 2015 with a concern to preserve the village character of Newtonville, limit gentrification, protect local businesses. We have an outreach list of 1,300 members and an active member list of about 70 members. We have at times worked with the Newtonville Area Council to contact Newtonville residents of important events. Our concerns range from environmental issues to zoning matters and from business issues to transportation problems. Are one or both of you here to speak?
Yes, I'm here. I think I'm going first.
You're both speaking? Okay, you get your 4 minutes. You want us to give you a 2-minute warning?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Margaret Ward and I live at 957 Washington Street. I've been living in Newtonville for 30 years. Prior to moving here, I attended college in Waltham, so I'm very familiar with the changes in density and traffic in this area. It appears that Boston suburbs are being pressured to build more market rate housing through high density development. These developments bring more residents to the area, which means more cars to the area. The failure that I see is that the planning for this kind of growth needs to be done at a regional level. Cities and towns working collectively rather than a municipality working in a silo. After all, we share roads and infrastructure. Anyone who has lived on the north side of Newton in the last 10 years has seen a huge increase in traffic. That is because of the tremendous amount of high density developments just over our city border in Waltham and in Watertown. The first wave of development happened on River Street and Pleasant Street in Waltham. And now we are currently seeing massive development happening on Arsenal Street and Galen Street. Soon to come on Galen Street is a life science lab that will host 430 parking places. All of this is happening right on our city border, and it will only impact the congestion further throughout the north side of Newton. Now, all these new residents of Watertown will need to travel west to get to 95 or the Mass Pike, and I can assure you, they are not getting on I-90 at Newton Corner to sit in traffic and pay a toll when they can cut through the northern villages in Newton. The north side of the city simply cannot absorb any more high-density development than what is already in the pipeline. It would be reckless of our city leaders to change zoning to encourage more. In contrast, the south side of Newton has not faced high-density development in their abutting towns. In fact, if you look at the map of Newton, much of the bordering land is for the purpose of golf courses and conservation. In closing, the zoning proposal needs to look at development from a regional standpoint, not within our city walls. Our Newton neighborhoods are not impervious to the impact of development happening just over the city line. Thank you.
Perfect, 2 minutes. And so next is Mr. Kavanaugh.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Bob Kavanaugh. My wife Carol and I have lived at 69 Court Street for over 42 years. Court Street is somewhat the epicenter of the Newton Village, Newtonville center being changed. I want to address what I consider the inanity and the inconsistency of the planning department in regards to the proposed zoning changes that would include the entire south side of our street as part of the village center. I would like to point out that 22 Court Street at the far eastern end of the block is a half mile from the proposed new senior center. How can something that far from the center of Newtonville be considered part of the village center? Now, the western end of Court Street, down by Central, is to be graced with VC3 zoning, while the eastern end towards Marty's will be zoned VC1. This means that the north side of the street is supposed to remain the same, but it too will be overwhelmed by the changes that the VC1 and the VC3 will bring. Now, I would like to point out that at the same time that their zoning redesign says, oh, the north side of the street won't be affected, the planning department has had discussions with the Boylston development over a 172 unit structure at 67R Court Street, which is on the north side. So we're kind of like, well, which is it? Are they rezoning or is it just business as usual around here? And it's actions like that that make those of us on Court Street not believe a word the planning department says about our neighborhood. It is getting really tiresome to have the city and developers looking at our small street as nothing more than a prime development area. Perhaps the city and the developers don't realize that actual real families live on Court Street.
Mr. Kavanaugh.
Our neighborhood is not a tabula rasa for the city planning department to play with, along with the developers who see nothing but money on Court Street. And I would reiterate what people say about transit oriented. Take the train to Fenway and see how friendly the transit area is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kavanaugh. Ms. Kyra, do you have anything to say? Ms. Kyra, are you still here?
I'm still here. I'm just listening.
Just for the sake of folks who are watching, is there some way to clarify, what this zoning is versus what's happening at the 172 unit project that Mr. Kavanaugh described? Or should I ask Mr. Heath to do that?
Yeah, well, we can both, yeah.
Yeah, it's, I mean, what's happening now is under current zoning. Could you describe?
Right.
Correct, and nothing has been actually submitted. There were some initial inquiries from a developer over there. My understanding is there's some real challenges with developing that site. Many things that we pointed out when we first met with them, but that's under current zoning. That's not part of this proposal.
Yeah. Oh no, I know that.
Okay.
Okay, just want to make sure, because there's a lot of people watching. I want to make sure people, folks can understand your gist. Yes, Director.
Yeah, just real quickly on that. It was a private property owner that came forward with a plan that then had a community meeting. The planning department wasn't party to that. They had discussions with us. We suggested they have a community meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. I just want to make sure that everybody here understands what's being put forward here. Thank you very much. Next is Neighbors for an Historic Newtonville, represented by Ellen Fitzpatrick. This group represents a group of approximately 10 neighbors, many of whom were involved in helping to establish the Newtonville Local Historic District over 20 years ago. They have met periodically over the ensuing years and have been joined by newer residents as well. Ms. Fitzpatrick, I think I saw you. Are you ready to speak?
I am. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Ellen Fitzpatrick, a 40-plus year resident of Foster Street in Newtonville and a professor of history by occupation, speaking to you tonight on behalf of the group of neighbors who live in the Newtonville Local Historic District, I should say a group of neighbors. We share with you a commitment to advancing the city's diversity and ensuring truly affordable housing in this and every other part of Newton. We ask you to advance these goals and to preserve the integrity of the Newtonville Local Historic District by removing its buildings, structures, and streetscapes from the proposed rezoning map. In 2002, when the Board of Aldermen nearly unanimously created the Newtonville Local Historic District, it made a commitment to maintain and protect this area. It explicitly recognized that for over a century and a half, the neighborhood has provided homes for a diverse collection of middle and working class residents, many of whom commute to work in Boston by railroad, streetcar, and now bus lines. The city emphasized then, as it does now, that the area's designation as historically significant was derived from, quote, the cohesive nature of the neighborhood, a cohesion that resulted from, and I quote, the overall massing, scale, lot size, setbacks, and craftsmanship of its structures. The preservation imperative the city endorsed still defines the neighborhood. Under the existing ordinance and procedures, alterations may be made and thoughtful development can be pursued with the informed guidance of the Newtonville Historic District Commission, but nothing justifies a wholesale rezoning that would enable changes in the massing, scale, lot size, setbacks, and craftsmanship that the Newtonville Local Historic District was designed to protect. The plan before you would potentially allow all of these prohibitive steps. One of the defining features of the Newtonville Local Historic District from the 19th century to the present day has been the mix of tenants and homeowners within the neighborhood, which has enhanced its diversity. Its residents have included renters who have found truly affordable apartments in many homes within the district. Rental income, often set well below market values, has likewise made many of these historic homes affordable for their owners. Meanwhile, new developments with their modest set-asides of affordable units have brought extremely expensive apartments into adjacent neighborhoods. Rezoning within the historic district at this point would almost certainly drive up rents, thereby reducing the social and economic diversity the local historic district designation is charged to preserve. Under the existing ordinance, the commission has the power to oversee changes to any structure within the district, even by imposing stricter regulations than those within the city zoning ordinance. The proposed rezoning before you would require the commission to spend its time pushing back against obviously inappropriate proposed changes in the district. If it is not excluded, the proposed rezoning will create a wholly unwarranted burden upon the citizen volunteers who serve on the commission to monitor construction and development within the district that the city itself will have set in motion. The city should neither create this tension nor impose this additional responsibility on the Newtonville Historic Commission that it established. In sum, the proposed ill-advised map before you identifies for rezoning roughly 20 structures, including many single and multi-family residences, as well as a historic multi-unit apartment building within the local district. We urge that you remove them from the proposed rezoning plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Heath and then Councilor Danberg. Did
Just
you
real
want to speak?
quickly, I did.
Okay, go ahead.
So I just want to be clear that the proposed rezoning doesn't remove any of the protections of the historic district. whatsoever. They remain in place.
We understand that, and I think Ms. Fitzpatrick alluded to that. But I think maybe what isn't clear is where we're trying to take this. What's the reason for including it in the district? And we discussed that at last meeting a little bit.
Yeah. As
Go
Ms. Kyra alluded to, we're looking at how we incentivize reuse of structures so that they, in some cases, become potentially more economically viable than they are now. That might be an avenue for the historic district properties.
Right, so that's something that we're trying to work on. We haven't seen there, and may require a whole different set of metrics than what's proposed for VC1, because the intention, and I'm not saying it's working right now, none of us are saying that. The intention was to recognize that sometimes, and we have this in Newton Highlands on Lincoln Street, occasionally somebody, can't manage to keep up the large, beautiful Victorian home. But they stay there, and there's no option for changing the use in order to help provide resources to keep the property in good shape. So the idea was to allow a new use by right to promote the continued preservation and maintenance of the structure.
There are multiple uses right now within the local historic district of several structures here.
There are, but they're not allowed by right. That's the point. So we don't have the right mix right now, the right bunch of metrics, but I appreciate your comments. And I think a couple of counselors wanted to speak. I had Counselor Danberg and Baker and Leary on
Thank
this
you.
topic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Most of my questions were actually covered in what's just been said. I wanted to know what protections there were for historic structures. And I also understood that adaptive reuse is not allowed by right now and would be under the new zoning. However, the protections, same protections for the structure itself are still in place, if that's correct. Yes, thank you.
Counselor Baker.
I just want to be clear. I thought Ms. Fitzpatrick's concluding comment was lost a little bit in my hearing. I just want to be clear. Your recommendation, as I heard it, was to leave the historic district out of the rezoning.
Yes.
Right?
There are 20 structures that appear to have been somewhat jerry-picked under this map, and I see no harm whatsoever to the larger project that you are underway with in leaving these structures out for the reasons that I've outlined in my comment.
I'm clear about that, because this, again, it may be a place where we can discuss in committee where I think we ought to entertain those kind of choices. It may be that there are things that otherwise, but we could leave everything exactly the way it is. And so that's just an option. I just want to be clear about that.
Understand. Councilor Leary, I believe you're next.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say one of my big concerns, and I think Ms. Fitzpatrick and others have raised this, is gentrification. And I'm concerned about that now under current zoning. I've been seeing it in my neighborhood of Nonantum in the last few months. Big, $1 million homes or duplexes are replacing very modest, smaller homes. It's happening under the current zoning. I think we really need to be careful with the rezoning, with the new zoning map, that we're looking carefully at tools we can use. And I don't have all the answers on this, but I think part of it is within the historic districts, is to make sure that when we're incentivizing any redevelopment, we're thinking about smaller units, more modest units, and ways to create naturally affordable units. And I hear it over and over again in my community, and I hear it over and over again in that meeting. So I think it's something we really need to take a very close look at.
Thank you.
May I just say that's an excellent point. And I think if you look at the rental prices for the apartments within the local historic district and compare them to the rental prices for most of the regularly priced units in the new development next door to it, you're going to see a doubling and tripling of rents. And that creates opportunities, of course, for landlords to try to, raise prices. So you're driving rents up instead of lowering them.
That's happening now, though. That's my concern.
Yes, it is. It is happening right now, no question.
I'm gonna wanna go on to the next speakers, but I think there are groups other than yours, the Building Professionals Group, the Newton Historic Commission, who were looking to give us ideas about how this could be done successfully so that we can allow for alternative uses of these beautiful old Victorian homes, for example, but give some owners who need it the opportunity to apply additional resources to the maintenance of properties which require enormous amounts of maintenance. So if we could talk in the future, I think that might be helpful. Thank you,
Sure.
Councilor Baker.
Just to clarify though, as I understand it, the historic district is not experiencing a sense of properties not being able to be maintained. People are buying these and maintaining them as they are. I think the part of the challenge is that there may be specific properties scattered around the city that in that situation, but my impression is the historic districts that function so that they in fact encourage kind of investment that we want to take place by the property owners because they're protected in that investment. So that's why I think we need to carefully look at the districts differently than we might in an historic structure or somewhere else. That's all.
Let's continue this conversation at the end of the statements.
Understood.
Thanks. The next group is similar. You might want to join the Neighbors for Historic Newtonville, as the next group is the Newtonville Neighbors for Historic Preservation, represented by Chris Klein. Please let me know it's pronounced differently. And your group strives to make Newton more diverse, affordable, and welcoming to people of all incomes, races, ages, and abilities. We were founded in 2023 and represent a dozen neighbors in the Newtonville Historic District. So maybe you can explain to us your relationship with the Newtonville, the Neighbors for Historic Newtonville.
Yeah, they are our neighbors. Lindsay's here as well, and she's going to open up for us.
So you have two people speaking. You want a 2-minute warning?
Correct.
Yeah.
Can you say who you both are?
Go
Hi,
ahead, Lindsay, you start.
Sure. I'm Lindsay Fieldman and I live at 114 Lowell Ave.
You're going to speak first. We'll give you 2 minutes, or we'll give you a 2
Okay. All right, thank you. So I'm here with my neighbor, Chris. We're representing Newtonville Neighbors for Historic Preservation and are speaking on behalf of a group of Newtonville residents and business owners with a shared mission of making Newton more diverse, affordable, and welcoming to people of all incomes, races, ages, and abilities. We believe zoning is a lever we can thoughtfully use to address quality of life, housing inequality, and environmental issues. We are concerned that the proposed zoning currently being shown by the ZAP is in direct contradiction to the own city's planning department's own stated goals and data. So we offer the following 3 points tonight and alternatives to be considered and addressed by the planning committee, whether that's today or at a future meeting. So the first thing we wanted to talk about was quality of life. You've heard tonight and will continue to hear from our community about the traffic and safety issues that already exist in Newtonville. Proposed upzoning and increased density without consideration for the impact it will have on public safety and other infrastructure like schools is very short-sighted. First, the unforeseen impact on our already crowded schools. I have a daughter that attends Newton schools. Newton's own school committee just voted to split the Cabot Elementary School to feed into 2 different middle schools due to overcrowding a day and under-enrollment at Bigelow. Second, I mentioned I live on Lowell Ave. Newton's own planning and transportation department has identified Lowell Avenue as one of the highest priorities in the city for traffic calming measures due to the high numbers of speeding and accidents. As others have mentioned tonight, we're also very challenged by the committee's definition of transit-oriented. It is our experience that while Newtonville is marketed as transit-friendly, one must have a car, if not 2 for a family, to do everyday activities like get to work, pick up a child from daycare, or drive to a dentist appointment. While we agree for both climate change and affordability reasons, we need to be building smaller homes in denser places, closer together and closer to jobs and public transportation. We're concerned that Newtonville has very weak public transit capacity. We'd also like to talk about and understand the legacy that we're leaving with the zoning as it's proposed. Newton has a history of housing inequality and displacement. So we urge the city to consider alternatives to the proposed zoning that, instead of incentivizing luxury development, focuses on 100% affordable housing, multi-generational and accessible housing, and retail and commercial districts that support and encourage women and minority-owned businesses. Data show that upzoning accelerates rather than tempers gentrification. As an alternative, we ask the city to consider 100% affordable housing overlays like our neighbors in Cambridge, focused on areas of Newton with larger available parcels. So I'll pass the floor to Chris to discuss some of our concerns with the new zoning and how it may impact the environment.
Okay, that was 3 minutes. Good, next, please.
All right, my name's Chris Klein. I live on Page Road, 26 Page Road, on the corner of Page and Lowell. We actually work closely with our neighbors on this. I will submit my testimony here, but I think I'm going to go off script a little bit. Part of it was the environmental impact that, if you look, interestingly, after our last meeting, the New York Times had a front page article about the climate, and it mapped our neighborhood. If you look at Boston, Boston's green. And that's why they built houses, right? They built a lot of houses and they work there, and they have a great T system. We build a lot of expensive apartments with a lousy T system. We are not transit oriented. So if you're a mother like myself and Lindsay, you have small children who are walking to all the schools, there is a massive increase in traffic, massive. Why we don't.
It's fine. Thank you very much. You said you're going to submit your comments.
Was that a full minute? Was that a minute?
Yes, it was. Sorry, that's not much time, but we look forward to your comments, and you can send them in writing, and that's very helpful to us anyway. Thank you.
Well, let me be very clear that we're asking you to not upzone anywhere near the historic district. There's absolutely no need for it. I don't see any need for it. I appreciate your intention of trying to help the historic district, but I'm not sure anyone's crying out for it.
Thank you, Ms. Pine. We hear you. There's just a lot of other speakers here this evening. Next is also from Newtonville. This is the Lowell Avenue Neighbors, represented by Peter Harrington, an action committee of the Newtonville Informal Neighborhood Group that has existed over 22 years. Current membership of the group is 200, with 20 members of this action committee. This group works to protect and preserve our economic and cultural diversity, establish and maintain our historic district, and watch over private and municipal plans to urbanize our neighborhood. Mr. Harrington, are you here to speak?
I am here to speak.
Please go ahead.
Would you appreciate it if you'd let me know 30 seconds before closing? I reside at 157 Lowell Avenue in a home that was first built in the early 1830s. I was told by a prior owner, a World War I fighter pilot, that he discovered evidence that our house was a stop on the Underground Railroad. It is one of the 4 homes on Lowell Avenue that you propose to rezone for apartments. My calculation is that 20 or more units could be built on our land. There's a conflict between the purposes of your village center zones, which is to tear down and rebuild, and the purposes of our Newtonville Local Historic District, which is to preserve and protect. We ask you to withdraw your plan to insert village center zones into our historic district. The Secretary of State says that a local historic district is established and administered by a community to protect distinctive characteristics of important areas. Newton is a certified local government. Your rezoning of our local historic district may well cause the loss of access to federal funds and jeopardize your participation in the program as a certified district. 171 Lowell Avenue at the corner of Washington Street is an iconic example of a Greek revival home, according to Newton Municipal Records. It's been painted pink since before I moved to Lowell Avenue in 1965. It is memorialized on a bicentennial commemorative blanket hanging in our library, depicting historic places in Newton. Your ordinance will put it in a VC1 zone so that it can be scheduled for future demolition. Do you want to do that? I don't think so, but I do think you've been led down the garden path by those who haven't given this proposal enough thought, by those that only see one side of the issue. Another question is about the rezoning of the church across the street from 157 Lowell Avenue. Your ordinance will put that in a VC2 zone to allow 4 stories. And as I understand, add more stories at a later time to increase it to 5 or more. There's no purpose in doing that in a single and 2-family residential neighborhood. The same applies to 2 abutting lots on Washington Terrace, owned by Robert Korff. It was sad to lose those 2 fine homes. It's an intrusion into the Foster Street Historic District abutters neighborhood. I'm sure Mr. Korff thinks that we cannot find enough unpleasant things to say about him, and he may be correct. However, in this instance, he should be recognized for solving a Newtonville problem created by the city of Newton when it evicted the post office delivery trucks from the Austin Street parking lot and sent them to park on Washington Street. He's going to use that land to create a post office parking lot. The post office is a vital aspect of our village community, and we would like to preserve it. Thank you, Robert, for your help. 30 seconds.
We're at 50.
Pardon?
You have 50 seconds.
Well, I'll skip the rest. I want to respond. I know that you're anxious to correct every little error that's said, and I do want to respond to your comments about Norma Swenson's concerns. The city of Newton is about to destroy the only green space park area in Newtonville Business Center. So I think that all of your comments are very nice and you're very concerned, but your facts are wrong. The city is not in favor of preserving green space and open space. You're creating new cement deserts in our villages. And then you're telling us that we should be happy to get them.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I have a question from President Albright, sorry.
Mr. Harrington, which green space are, 2 questions. Which green space are you referring to that we're about to destroy?
This is an example of the problem that we have is you don't even know where the green spaces are in your own ward. There is a park in front of what was the Newtonville Library dedicated by the Board of Aldermen, and you now propose to tear down the library and put a building right over where that park was.
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about now. You're talking about the senior center. My other
No, I'm talking about the park in front of the old Newtonville Library at 345 Walnut Street.
Yes.
Building you propose to build is not a new senior center. It is a new civic center, community center, but it is not a senior center.
Okay.
Seniors are going to be given a couple of small rooms.
So my only other thing that I would like to say is having traveled a bit through Europe and the major cities in Europe, and it is amazing when you walk through those cities and you see a plaza and you walk a few more blocks to another area and you see another plaza. I think part of our problem is that our forefathers before us didn't leave very little land for parks. Most of the land in our city became housing. And, it's hard to correct a problem like that. We don't want to take people's houses for eminent domain to create a park.
Well, we're doing that behind the senior center, actually.
Yeah, well, behind the house that we're taking, not by eminent domain, but by agreement.
A friendly agreement
Friendly.
is going to be a green space.
But
I don't know where you walked in Europe, but where I walked, everything was paved over. The parks are gone.
Gosh, no, not at all.
This is
Not at all.
private parks. If you want to go to Paris, you can find private parks, but you can't find them in Vienna. You can't find them in Naples. You can't find them.
Please, we need to keep going with, there's a lot of other people who would like to speak. I'm sure that you and President Albright can have this conversation
We'll meet for
over a cup
coffee.
of coffee at Framway. At some point. Okay, we have, next is the Nonantum Neighborhood Association represented by Terry Sorrow. This, as we know, is a volunteer community organization committed to, as they say, fostering ideas, initiatives, improvements, and building a strong foundation of growth and prosperity through dedicated advocacy for both residents and the businesses of the village of Nonantum. They were founded 12 years ago and serve all of Nonantum. Ms. Sorrow, thank you for sending your comments in advance this morning. Are you ready to speak with us?
Yes, I am.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the Zoning and Planning Commission. My name is Terry Sorrow. I have lived in Nonantum all my life, and I am president of the Nonantum Neighborhood Association for the last 12 years. Our association has received multiple of comments from our neighbors who are concerned about the proposed zoning changes for the Nonantum Village Center. Nonantum is one of the oldest village centers in Newton. Its narrow streets and sidewalks and limited parking and transportation options make it zoning exception. It doesn't fit neatly into the proposed village center zoning options. Therefore, we feel that there needs to be more flexibility. We are trying to preserve current building heights and the existing character of the village center with small family-owned shops. Swartz Ace Hardware, for example, has been in the village center for 133 years. We love our Greentail Table. We love Moldover. We love our West Street Grill and other restaurants. We are not opposed to change, however. Our neighbors say that they are tired of rapid growth and that the Nonantum is already sheltering a lot. Instead of the proposed Village Center 2 zoning, Nonantum wishes to propose something like a Village Center 1.5, which would have lower building heights and 2.5 stories. We fear that Village Center 2 zoning would change Nonantum into a congested and unrecognizable neighborhood in the future. Current family-owned businesses would be pushed out by large developers offering millions to redevelop whole blocks and charging higher retail rents. Traffic is already intolerable during rush hour due to overdevelopment. What will more development bring? Of the many concerning reasons for removing VC2, our main arguments for removing VC2 zoning from our village centers are traffic issues, narrow streets, sidewalks, limited parking, limited transportation, and that the entire village of Nonantum is already zoned for multifamily housing. Our village has plenty of affordable housing within and around the center. Today, single family and two family homes are being knocked down and becoming 3 to 5 units. So increase in housing options in the village center where transportation and parking is limited unnecessary. Open green space and tree canopies are being lost. Construction is also increasing rat infestations in Nonantum. In addition, large manufacturing parcels outside the village centers are being converted into housing. The Riverdale apartment complex off California Street will have 243 rental units. Haywood House will have 55 units in not enough parking. And these are already erected. Nonantum lacks trolley cars, commuter trains, frequent bus service. We need to see better transportation options and basic road improvements before making any zoning changes. Not enough traffic improvements are happening with the current development. The city has traffic improvements planned for Washington Street, but none for Watertown or California streets, which have daily traffic jams during rush hour. The abundance of side streets, also known as access roads, cannot accommodate the influx of added traffic. We need a regional traffic and transportation study before making any zoning changes. We know that the current zoning, we also know we want to preserve our neighborhood. It is working in our community. I am sure you would agree that Nonantum is the gateway of Newton in terms of affordability. We respectfully ask again to remove the proposed VC2 zoning and replace it with another option which preserves current building heights. This densely populated multifamily zone neighborhood is already affordable. We would like to preserve the village center for mainly small businesses, not 3 to 5 floors, mixed-use development with limited parking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sorrow. Any comments or questions for clarification? Seeing none, thank you. And I will go on to the next. Actually, the next group decided not to speak, so I will go to Newton Villages Alliance, represented by Kathleen Curl Grazer. This alliance, founded almost a decade ago, is a community and open space advocacy organization serving residents in all of Newton's 13 villages. The mission of the Newton Villages Alliance is to preserve the character and scale of Newton's villages and residential neighborhoods, educate individuals about these matters, and advocate for views of residents being a key part of Newton's decision-making process. Ms. Grazer, are you ready to speak with us?
I am, starting now 4 minutes. Kathleen Curl Grazer, 258 Mill Street. I'm a 20-year resident. If counselors or staff want to refute or clarify my comments after I speak, I request additional time for rebuttal. Like the residential district upzoning effort opposed by residents and set aside 2 years ago, the current village center upzoning push is problematic, and there are some reasons why. First, I think it's irresponsible. If this administration and its city council supporters believe that Newton must obey DHCD dictates under the Commonwealth's MBTA community zoning law, then it's irresponsible to pursue local upzoning that wouldn't satisfy those requirements. Instead, why not work with our state delegation and DHCD to try to revise those regulations to allow the kind of zoning that we want to actually qualify under MBTA Communities Act. 2, lack of transparency. The city must mail a letter to every resident and every business owner in Newton, informing them that this administration wants to upzone much of Newton, because every resident and business owner would be affected by it. Many residents and small business owners will be displaced by the high-density redevelopment you seek to enable. The city has a moral and possibly a legal duty to inform all Newton residents and business owners of the risk of displacement due to property speculation unleashed by upzoning. You are elected to represent us, the residents of Newton, not the interests of those wealthy property investors who stand to profit from this proposed upzoning. 3, this is regressive, not progressive. Upzoning won't improve social justice, housing affordability, or the planet. Upzoning Newton to enable by right construction of mostly very expensive, market rate, high density residential rental high rises in most villages and mansions in politically protected areas will spark widespread displacement, demolition, tree and green space loss. Our Newton of working and middle class homeowners and renters will be transformed into an urban scape of mostly renters paying the maximum rents their wealthy corporate landlords can extract. This upzoning policy will result in increasing concentration of land and home ownership and resulting political power in fewer, wealthier hands, converting Newton to a place where ownership of a small house and backyard and the ability to build equity and transgenerational wealth through home ownership is impossible for working and middle-class people. That's the redlining of our time. It's the opposite of progressive. And finally, it's discriminatory. This upzoning is discriminatory in intent and will be in disparate impacts. There is no non-discriminatory justification for targeting some villages and neighborhoods for intense high-rise redevelopment and others for less or none. The impacts of displacement will hit legally protected groups hardest, but your liability may not end there. Making parking and driving more difficult will have a discriminatory impact on seniors, those with mobility challenges, and women, children, and others with reasons to be fearful of violence or accidents. There are many people who simply cannot hop on a bike, take an Uber, walk alone at night, or take public transit safely. And zoning to make their lives more difficult is discriminatory. expecting people to live in crowded concrete landscapes with fewer trees and green spaces and more pressure on parks, playing fields, and healthy spaces should be seen as a discriminatory and disparate impact. Please don't use our taxpayer dollars on this irresponsible, non-transparent, regressive, and discriminatory upzoning gift to wealthy and connected property investors to the detriment of the residents you were elected to represent. That's all.
Thank you, right on time. Any comments or questions? Thank
That
you.
was awesome.
Excuse me. We're going on to the next speaker, which is the Newton Interfaith Coalition for Housing Equity.
Excuse me, Chairman Crossley.
who's-
I'm sorry. I think you skipped over the Jackson Homes Historic Neighborhood Association. We're here and we'd like to speak.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're
Since
right.
you introduced the next speaker, I'll
No,
take
that's, thank you so much for saying that. I saw the dropped out message, but that was for the Historic District Commission, the Upper Falls one. You're right. You were supposed to be before Ms. Greaser, so Jackson Homes Historic Neighborhood Association, you must be Wendy Plesniak.
Yes, thank you.
This group is the Jackson Homes Historic Neighborhood Association, formed in 2017. We serve the interests of just over 100 people and their family in our Newton Corner neighborhood. Our speaker will be Dr. Ravikant Papu. How'd I do?
Yes, he's my husband and he asked me to speak, so.
Okay, all right, ready, go.
Okay. I'm Wendy Plesniak and I'm speaking today for the Jackson Homes Historic Neighborhood Association. Our neighborhood is on the north side of the Pike in Newton Corner, across from exit 127. We're one neighborhood in a densely built area with 2-family homes, multi-unit condos and apartments, and a few single-family homes on small lots. We abut a mixed-use stretch of Washington Street being overlaid with VC3. We support the modest requests that the NCNA shared on January 9 and agree that we have no village center in Newton Corner. We are astonished that this draft creates a large area of VC3, much on the north side, that permits so much height and density in a place that's already dense and underserved. It will escalate neighborhood challenges here much more than serve our needs. We can't understand the inequities in the plan's impact across 12 villages and its disconnections with the MBTA Communities Act. Newton Corner is being heavily rezoned without obvious justification or betterment. The plan upzones 85 residential buildings in Newton Corner. The plan rezones more land in Newton Corner than any other village, 2.6 million square feet. About 10% of that is VC3 in our neighborhood. All other villages except 3, including a number with Green Line service, are treated with less than half the rezoning planned for Newton Corner. We have no train service, some bus service to Boston, but the city can't count on externalities like MassDOT or the MBTA to provide any more transit for us. We sit at exit 127, a turnpike neighborhood. The MBTA Communities Act classifies us as an adjacent community and recommends a 10% housing increase here. But you have zoned to surpass this recommendation. The plan overlooks or ignores that adding density here will add more cars in this already fragile walking environment and will require more parking. And the spine of this VC3 zone runs along a stretch of Washington Street responsible for half the accidents near the I-90 exit 127 interchange. The plan marks the VC3 zone 50 to 100 feet away from 20 plus residential buildings here. This could permit a dense row of structures 70 feet high, really close to those. And with opt-in VCOD, there are a variety of allowable uses here and some that are not so inspiring. With no construction vibration ordinance, Newton can't protect our residents' homes so close to this boundary from development-related damage. The plan requires this stretch of VC3 to site trash enclosures behind it all along the neighborhood. Please just ask our counselors or the law department about the problems we already have with business trash and rats. Finally, and critically, as far as we know, this plan includes no framework to measure how well its key objectives are met across the city and no mandate to adapt the plan or be accountable for shortfalls or problems. These should be requirements for such a major plan. Newton has an opportunity to set an example for how to prioritize and protect all its residents' well-being while transforming for the future. Look, more housing, affordable housing, yes, but please scale back this plan for density and intensity here. Please revise your plans for Newton Corner with a lighter touch that's more attuned to the area's reality, livability, and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Plesniak. I'm sorry if you don't remember, but I did attend the Newton Corner Neighborhood Association, but also the Village Center for Newton Corner and Nonantum. Were you at that? Or
No, I
at
was-
either of those?
No, I was not.
We've had a number of conversations with the Neighborhood Association in Newton Corner that have been very constructive. I just would like to recommend that you also speak with them. Mr. Rasala has been key in like really digging deep into the zoning, and we've had some very productive conversations that have kind of gone, you know, some their way, some our way, but I think it would be great if you spoke with them too.
We've looked at his analysis and are grateful for it. I think he's done an amazing job.
And it might be a little step further from that at this point, but you know, I just hope you're talking to them because you're right in there, right? Yeah, thank you. Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted Wendy to know that we've been looking closely at the Village Center stage 1 map, and I agree there needs to be some significant revisions. So I think you will see those changes reflect in the next version, the 2.0 period, because I was concerned about some of the VC3 directly abutting residents on the north side of Washington Street. So thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you, Councilor Leary.
Thank you again. Okay, so the next group who wishes to speak is the Newton Interfaith Coalition for Housing Equity. Now, our contact person is Nancy Zollers, who happens to be in the room with us. But I was just told that the two folks who are going to speak are online. So the Newton Interfaith Coalition for Housing Equity formed 18 months ago with a mission to significantly impact Newton housing affordability, diversity, and abundance as an imperative of our faith. We are a coalition of the willing, including from United Parish of Auburndale, Congregation Dorshite Tzedek, I do that right? Sacred Heart, Our Ladies, Union Church in Waban, Temple Shalom, Newton Highlands UCC, Newton City Church, and still other houses of worship continue to join. So I understand there's two speakers. Could you tell us, please, who you both are? And but only one of you needs to step forward first.
I'm Lisa Keshet. I'm speaking first before Reverend Devlin Scott, who's also present.
Thank you. Okay, so please, and we'll give you a 2-minute warning.
Great. Thank you so much. And good evening.
I'm sorry. Could you, for the council, we'll start over. Could you say your name again? There wasn't good hearing in here.
Of course, it's Lisa Keshet.
Thank you. Please go ahead now.
Good evening. Again, my name is Lisa Keshet, and I'm a Waban resident, a member of Congregation Dorshite Tzedek in West Newton, a local real estate professional, and a participant in the Newton Interfaith Coalition for Housing Equity, or NICHE, whose members collaborated together to write these comments, and which Reverend Devlin Scott and I would like to read now. As Newton clergy, faith leaders, and representatives of NICHE, the Newton Interfaith Coalition for Housing Equity, we have kept informed and participated in the zoning and planning work this year. We contributed as well to the community engagement process, and today our faith leads us to speak about a Newton that is inclusive, welcoming, and just. We have come to see equality in society as a religious imperative as well as a civic imperative. The religious imperative of equality was expressed by the friendship and social activism of Rabbi Joshua Heschel and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who together prayed with their feet during the Voting Rights March from Selma to Montgomery on March 21st, 1965. Rabbi Heschel taught that once one understands that the divine exists in every person, or in Hebrew, B'Tselem Elohim, one cannot harbor any hatred or ill will towards others. From this posture, Reverend Devlin Scott and I, with support of the rest of NICHE, advocate for housing and zoning codes in the city of Newton that foster diversity and inclusion. Today, we pray with our feet from a place of love, not anger, and with strength, not weakness, relying on the guidance that is offered by our sacred bonds. These sacred bonds guide us to care about many issues in Newton, but zoning touches on multiple ones.
2 minutes. Please keep going. You have 2 minutes left.
Housing density is good for our climate crisis. Our congregations have climate justice as a priority mission, as well as housing justice. We are praying for God's earth and know that abundant and affordable housing serves key environmental sustainability goals, as well as inclusion goals. We acknowledge the West Newton Armory rebuild as an excellent example of climate conscience, equity and justice in housing reform, and inclusion, as it will be a home for over 50 people and include support services within the building. I'd like to now pass to Reverend Devlin Scott, who will continue with our comments.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Reverend Devlin Scott. I'm a resident of Newtonville and New City Church. The church I pastor is in Newton Highlands. Currently, our antiquated zoning, colored by historic red line exclusion and disinvestment, has resulted in the serious outcome that we need to respond to vigorously. Our pastors, teachers, nurses, first responders, and other key members in our community cannot afford to live in Newton, where there is a mismatch between employment and housing. Those who work in Newton during the day should be able to sleep in Newton at night. Our seniors cannot find smaller homes. Our graduates must live outside of Newton. Rents are unaffordable, and the average home price is $1.6 million. This is the result of housing that is not abundant, nor diverse, nor adequate for those who are very much a part of this community, and we advocate for that to change. We support housing that sustains Newton's commitment to racial equity and justice in an effort to remove the stain of Newton's history of redlining. Just 1 week ago, we gathered at Newton North High School to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. King. We proclaimed justice to be a community value. Reverend Dr. King said that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. We cannot merely move on from the atrocities of this city's past. We have an ethical call to intentionally recognize our history of prejudice and segregation, doing all that we can to correct this history. That is.
Please, if you can wrap up.
Sure. We support you in your efforts to create a reform zoning ordinance that allows families to live in Newton. Otherwise, it's just lip service. We want to vitalize our communities, and we want to welcome people of diverse income and faith. We say yes to Village Center's rezoning that allows multifamily housing by right. We say yes to Newton thriving with more families and more young people. We say yes to Newton being a welcoming place for all who want to live here. We say yes to finally addressing our wrongdoing of redlining and doing what is just. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for clarification? Thank you. Seeing none, let's see. We have, I think, 2 more groups. The Lower Falls Improvement Association, followed by the Economic Development Commission. The Newton Lower Falls Improvement Association, LFIA, is a neighborhood organization active since 1915, seeking to promote the neighborly interests of its members, foster community spirit, to do such things as may be appropriate or necessary to accomplish civic improvement, represented by Cerise Jaffe. Ms.
Hello.
Jaffe, are you with us?
I am.
Good. Please go
Hi.
ahead.
Thank you. I'm Cerise Jaffe, representing the LFIA as Civics co-chair. I'm a 40-year resident of Howard Road in Laurel Falls. Laurel Falls is a close-knit community of about 400 families. We deeply care about each other, and we care what happens to our village, as evidenced by our efforts around the huge Riverside project. We have a neighborhood listserv, a regularly published newsletter, social events, and beautification campaigns, and more. We have several questions about zoning redesign that we provided ahead of time. I'll read them now, and while I don't expect answers to all at this point, I look forward to your responses, perhaps in an email or in a meeting, so I can follow up with our board. The neighborhood would like to understand how the VC2 zone proposed for Washington Street in Newton Laurel Falls would change what can now be built both by right and by special permit. What we have in mind is a chart from the planning department that shows all of the dimensional requirements and limits of each existing zone on this section of Washington Street, both by right and by special permit, compared to those proposed in the VC2 zone. The dimensional requirements and limits we are particularly interested in include height, setbacks, and open space, both public and private. This goes along with the frequent requests we've had for modeling and to see what is built there now, what could be built there, and what could ultimately be built there if it's fully developed. 2, given the Riverside project, which will significantly increase traffic in Laurel Falls, how will zoning redesign further impact traffic in our neighborhood and on Washington Street, which is already a very busy street, especially if what is allowed by right under the proposed zoning is built? 3, the south side of Washington Street directly abuts the Charles River. Will zoning redesign incorporate specific guidelines for Laurel Falls that require setbacks from the river and address other environmental concerns regarding the impact on the river, as well as provide for public access to the river? Again, this is a question if what is potentially allowed by right is in fact built, even if it's over a length of time. 4, under the proposed zoning, can developers avoid the special permit process for larger projects simply by subdividing to create multiple lots, each of which is less than 30,000 square feet? And if not, how is that stipulated? We note that the side setbacks are very small and are 0 when abutting a party wall. Doesn't this mean that a developer using different entities can break up a large lot into smaller lots to avoid the special permit process without loss of building density? 5, because the design guidelines are discretionary, what will prevent low quality design and materials and projects that can be built by right? Have you considered imposing design requirements even for projects that are otherwise by right, similar to what Boston has done with its design overlay districts? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Ms. Kyra is prepared to do this at the moment, but there might be a few things that could be clarified tonight, Ms. Kyra.
Sure, I can clarify a couple, and it would probably be easier to look at all of your questions that you submit and respond more thoroughly. We are putting together a comparison table of the existing zoning dimensional requirements and the proposed. I do want to clarify that on the south side of Washington Street, adjacent to the Charles, that's still in a river protection area and has other conservation protections. So this would not change anything about the current Conservation Commission process. So anything will still need to go through and get the proper approvals there. And
excuse me, even if it's built by right?
Correct, yes. Yes, the zoning and the conservation side are separate. And the conservation side is state mandated. So nothing gets you out of that. Even a 40B doesn't get you out of that. So anything, whether it's built by right or by special permit, will still go through the Conservation Commission for approval there. And I'm trying to or what else there was. I think that's all I can answer right now, but I'll take a look at your list of questions.
Thank you. Can you comment at all about the traffic issue? Because that is a huge one for our community. Have you done any traffic studies or will be doing such?
That is a much larger issue. There's not a real good way to model what's going to happen over potentially decades into a traffic study.
Well, can I just respond in that we're bordered now by the huge Riverside project and Washington Street. That are the two borders of our community. And if both are very built up, you can understand that through traffic as well as entry and exit traffic will be enormous. So we'd just be curious to see what thinking has gone on in terms of anticipating even a modest growth on Washington Street, which is already pretty built up. So thank you.
This might be an appropriate time to, I noted your surprise when you thought maybe why would the Rivers Act still apply? There are numerous regulations from the state and also other regulations within our larger zoning chapter, which will continue to apply to these zones. These zones have specific dimensional controls in them. And there's a lot of design controls that are mandated within the draft text. The design guidelines are in addition to that. So it takes some effort. I've had to read it myself many times to understand, okay, what are the design controls that are in the text or that could be in the text versus what are the design guidelines to help, direct things that we can't legislate, but that might help direct the design that we want. And we still have to have a conversation in committee about whether we want to do that and what we think the value of that is. So I just think for everybody's sake, it might be good to, there's a lot more than just the height and the setbacks at play here.
Yes.
Councilor Baker.
There was a point that was made that I hope Ms. Kyra and the department are prepared to respond to, which is the question of the threshold for special permit versus the smaller parcel impacts. In other words, someone who wants to game the system and basically take a project which would otherwise qualify for special permit, but by cutting it into chunks and having party walls can produce an outcome outside of our range of vision, but basically something that will have the same impacts as a big project. It's not don't expect an answer for that, but I think as part of the conversation we need to have, it would be useful to have that point picked up.
Fairly, I think I heard that's a very complicated answer, right? Most of the lots as they exist in Lower Falls are over the 30,000 square foot threshold, so would go to a special permit. And I think as I heard the comments, that is understood. So then, but if you have multiple lots, you are limited to the footprint of the size of the building you can have, the maximum footprint per a lot. So there's setbacks between two buildings on a lot that would be required. So it's just a very complicated.
I understand. I'm not expecting the answer now, but I just think the point is that if you can subdivide without going through an approval process and then use the subdivided parcel to do something that you couldn't do otherwise, it's just to understanding.
That's a question I think that deserves a comment from the planning department. I'm not sure that you can subdivide a parcel without going through any kind of a process. I don't think there's
I think there's an A&R process you can do. And,
which is
approval not required, but it does still go through engineering for review. So you do have to meet all of a number of requirements of the subdivision regulations as well as the zoning. I think this is an interesting question about whether you could divide a parcel into smaller parcels. We have in some other aspects of the zoning written in some controls for that. One in particular is the inclusionary zoning, so that you couldn't divide up your project into smaller projects, each one coming in under the inclusionary zoning threshold. that's something we can think about and how that something like that could relate here. But we also should think about whether that is an outcome we want to prevent. A lot of the zoning is looking at facilitating more of the smaller scale infill development. So it may not be the worst outcome if someone were to divide a parcel into smaller parcels with individual buildings. There's certainly an inefficiency from a developer's perspective of building a bunch of smaller buildings and having to provide the parking on site for each one of those, having to provide the core, elevator access, all of that gets very expensive. So I don't know that it's something we would see much, but it is something we should think about whether it is a problem we want to prevent. But I think that's a topic we should, we'll need to dive in a little deeper at a later time.
Thank you.
Now, I guess.
I know you didn't.
You were saying that public testimony raises a point, I just thought we ought to.
And well, point well made, you know, but I do think there's a degree to which it's worth us even talking about, so know what's coming. And what else, what other work we have to do? I think, Director Heath, are you all set? You had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I was gonna reiterate the same point, which
Okay.
is smaller projects are exactly what we're trying to incentivize.
Got it. Okay. So we have to be able to look at the text and the controls and see if that's where it would go. We have two hands up from counselors. We have only one more speaker. So, Counselor Bowman and then Laredo.
So yes, I just wanted to quickly respond to Ms. Jaffe to say that, traffic planning is really something that needs to be done regionally. And thankfully, MassDOT right now is undertaking a study of the 128 I-95 corridor stretching from Waltham to south to Needham, incorporating this area and much more, looking at not only transportation, but land use and expected land use changes that will be happening. So this is a project that's ongoing now and looking at, they understand because of course, between MBTA zoning and just the pressure to build more housing, that these areas will become more dense and that we need to be responsible and change the transportation options. So they're looking at everything from how do we make it more bikeable? How do we make it easier to get on the T? Do we start encouraging more shuttle use, different bus routes? Do we change the way the highways interact with the main roads? And I do know that they are looking for citizen members to join. So I'm happy to talk to you about that further. But I think this is exactly the type of regional planning that needs to happen that will be very supportive for all of us as a region.
Thank you. Councilor Laredo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. In response to Mr. Heath's, your Director Heath's comment regarding encouraging smaller developments, I think we need to be very cautious about creating incentives for a developer to take a larger lot, which might have to go through a special permit process, and deliberately dividing it up so it can avoid the special permit process, particularly if we're going to be raising the threshold so much. And that's, I think, a real problem that we need to address, and not for this evening. And second, Madam Chair, I just want to remind everyone, because you spoke a little while ago about design guidelines and how they can influence what gets built. And I just want to remind the public who may not be with us for many of our deliberations that the guidelines have absolutely no force whatsoever. They're guidelines as drafted. That's it. A developer is completely free under the way this is drafted now to disregard those guidelines. And I think it's very important that as we craft this document, the public knows exactly what it's getting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Laredo. I think I did make that clarification. The next speaker is the Economic Development Commission, I believe represented by Phil Plotel, who is their chair. The Economic Development Commission, EDC, presently consists of 15 members, although there are 3 vacancies right now, appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. It was established under general laws, chapter 40, section 8A, to promote and develop business and industry within the city of Newton. The commission is charged with strengthening the local economy, leading to new job opportunities for residents and expansion of the city's tax base. Mr. Platel, are you still with us this evening?
I am, and thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak tonight and fulfill the EDC's statutory role to advise and make recommendations to this committee and other city entities. My name is Phil Platel. I live in Ward 5 in Waban, and I'm the chair of the city's Economic Development Commission. I am joined tonight by my fellow EDC officers, Sarah Rahman, our vice chair, and Chuck Tanowitz, our secretary. The commission has voted to support the proposed framework for village centers. Some key points in our support is that it creates new opportunities for economic development. The framework for village centers rezoning enables greater potential for economic activities across the city and all villages where it would be most appropriate. Specifically, the framework encourages smaller by right projects in villages as opposed to specially permitted mega developments. It aligns with the city's stated priorities for economic development, specifically the Economic Development Action Plan for the City of Newton, which the City Council approved and adopted in 2019. It supports the city in meeting its housing and sustainability needs. Newton, we need to increase the supply of affordable units to meet the needs of current and future residents. The city needs more mixed family developments near transit to comply with the state's MBTA community laws, which the city needs to pass for us to remain eligible for various state grants. Similarly, the framework also supports the Newton's 5-year climate action plan, which calls for developing more housing in proximity to public transportation to encourage mode shifts and decrease over-reliance on automobiles. The rezoning provides opportunities for local developers and smaller scale projects. The existing zoning code has long been in need of updating, and the special permit process has become the default starting point for too many development projects in the city. Because the special permit process is typically lengthy and expensive, it shuts out smaller local developers in favor of larger, well-resourced developers who are likely to seek the largest possible size and scale of projects to make their expense worthwhile. The proposed framework would help level the playing field by delivering zoning guidelines that are pragmatically updated to correspond to commercially viable projects and the present and future realities for village centers. If approved, the rezoning would provide a set of clear and transparent parameters that developers, including smaller local ones, could use to equally match, not force, possible projects to certain village and determined feasibilities. Similarly, the proposed zoning regulations encourages small business growth. Newton's existing zoning regulations on parking minimums have been identified as barriers to small businesses. The inability to meet these the current minimum parking requirements, delays and prevents the opening of new businesses, the expansion of existing businesses, and the hiring of additional employees. The special permit waiver process are routinely granted to restaurants and commercial users who can afford the cost and time to seek a waiver. Finally, the EDC recommends to pass the zoning. We also recommend continued citywide community outreach efforts that planning and the committee has done, and we encourage a continued focus.
Over time.
Oh, can I just make my last point?
No, I'm sorry, you're not over time. That was a 30-second warning.
Okay, thank you. We also encourage to continue and focus on appropriate commercial spaces in all the village zones, not just VC3, but in VC1 and VC2 as well. As a reminder, the commercial tax rate is almost double the residential tax rate, and increasing commercial uses in these village center zones would increase revenue, which would benefit the city in these difficult times.
Your time has elapsed.
Okay.
But we took a few seconds away from you. Somebody in the audience did. Thank you very much, Mr. Platel. Questions from council or the planning board or comments from staff for clarification on this? Anybody? Okay, that concludes the public statements from the groups who signed up. We are not taking general public comment this evening. This is, as I said at the beginning, this is not a public hearing. The public hearings will come much later. We are still gathering input from groups. This is one forum of many. So, but as you know, if you have something you want to say to us, please write us. We read all the emails, and we're keeping very careful track of everything. Everybody writes to us. You can go into the Friday packet before each one of our meetings, and you can see like a resume, last in is first, a long list of commentary from individuals on the one hand and organized groups on the other hand. Councillor Baker.
So it's not a surprise. I'm going to ask a procedural question.
No kidding.
So when Mr. Heath and the department come back and give us their version 2.0 or 1.9 or whatever it is, as I remember the timeline, we were going sort of through those conversations and then to a draft and then to a public hearing. The question is, will we have some interim commentary opportunity around the iteration 2.0? Because we can comment among ourselves, obviously, here, members of the committee and our colleagues on the council can join that conversation. But I guess the problem I'm wrestling with is if there's some, because the department is obviously spending some time thinking about adjusting everything you've heard and then adjusting what you recommended. Mr. Util, I keep calling Mr. Util, I'm sorry, the firm, Util, is doing similar things, and then we've got the MBTA community. So I guess the question is, again, we're trying to make this work in the time frame you've indicated. What is the public comment opportunity other than mail and things like that you just described?
I think I'm gonna say what I think might work, but of course the committee should weigh in. We've had a lot of public commentary since the beginning of 2021. Some just comes to us, but much of it has been fairly well organized. So we're going to have multiple meetings in committee in open public forums to hash through and decide whether we think the version 2 has reflected well the input that we've received and most importantly, how well it's going to serve our goals and our villages. At some point, we have to go to public hearing. The public hearing is likely to be more than one night, I would guess. So there, like we do in land use, I imagine there's going to be time to go back and forth with folks. Hear what they think about the version 2. I'm sure people are going to start writing to us and calling us as soon as version 2 is issued and read through. So my thinking is that we'd be better served to bring this to a full open public forum and formal public hearings, unless the committee feels like, we're not there yet. We're not going to do that until the committee feels, we have a product that meets our goals and objectives, at which we've gone over multiple times now.
Well, I understand, and I think it's there's a problem of trying to figure out where we are as well, and I assume that all of us will get communicated with independently. I guess part of the reason for my inquiry is that there are sometimes things that don't occur to us even that may shape what goes to public hearing, and then of course we can hold off and do until we get through the public hearing. We've got the MBT Communities Act, so I grant you it's not an easy process to articulate. I think that just that I'm not yet persuaded about a number of the aspects that are core to even version 1.
Nor am I.
Yeah. So I just want to say that because I don't want to have people feel that this version is moving inexorably to some conclusion without having a chance to sort it out, but that's all. I just wanted to raise that.
No,
question.
and I think it's important to say again, as was said at the beginning, just in case everybody wasn't here or whatever, is there's a long list of tasks that, represent issues we need to dig into that we're not entirely sold on yet. So, they might be different for you than for me, but I think those tasks have been enumerated and described in the memo and this evening. And I'm looking forward to seeing, for me, I get what we have. I see what the problems are with it, I think, but gonna see what the professionals bring back to us as ways to solve those problems. And by professionals, I mean staff and UTIL, but also there are folks working in the community who are pretty routinely sending us some interesting ideas. So, we have a lot of work to do. So think about that third meeting in March,
Anytime we get the override that week.
Yeah, I know. That's just a vote. That takes a few seconds.
As a follow-up to that, I was thinking that if you could start looking for a third meeting in March, that we could find on our calendars, we can always not have it, but at least it'll be there if we need it, and I suspect we might.
And we don't want to do it on the 15th, is that what I heard
Well,
you
that
say?
week is tough for me, but that's just, but that's, and it's the override is on Tuesday, so there are a lot of activity going on.
Okay. So, Counselor Lucas, nice to have you with us this evening.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I've been listening in on the this meeting and the one from 2 weeks ago. I wanted to reserve my comments till everyone had spoken, all the community groups had spoken. And, it's clear and obvious that not everyone in the city agrees on everything, especially when it comes to zoning. We have people who, or groups that spoke that are in favor of the general framework of what's on the table. We had groups that spoke who are, you could say, more or less opposed to what's on the table. And I just want to think about our role as counselors, in that we're here to represent everyone, not just the ones that we happen to agree with. We're talking about the public comments. So, there's lots of room in the middle, whether you're for it, what's on the table, or you're against it. And I would like to see the ZAP committee and the planning department to find some middle ground on this zoning framework in the 2.0. The 1.0, I had a lot of problems with the maps. They're going to change. I am eager to see what they're going to look like when 2.0 comes out. So I just want that to, I just want to put that out there, because what we have with 1.0, there were many problems with it. I know there were going to be some changes with Newton Corner, I think you referenced. There are going to be some special rules. I think Chair Crossley, you mentioned last week with the Upper Falls Greenway. I heard you talk about that. I think that's a good thing. So I'm looking forward to 2.0. And, we heard a lot of people tonight talk about the Newtonville Historic District. They don't think it should be in the Village Center zoning. I 100% agree with them. It doesn't belong in it at all. If you're going to keep it in it, I'm going to suggest that you also provide a special set of rules, kind of like what you did with the Upper Falls Greenway. And I just want the council and the committee and the planning department to, let's work together. Let's come up with something that most people in Newton could go along with. That's what I would like to see. That's where I would like us to go. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Lucas. Of course, we do want to have a product that makes sense for the whole city and that the majority of folks and the council will want to support. I do want to, so I did meet with the Upper Falls Area Council last week, and since you mentioned it, I want to put this on the table. I took some slides that Ms. Kyra nicely gave me from our basic presentation to help them understand the rules. And I discussed with them in December, and I have raised with planning and discussed with them this time that the Greenway is a unique feature in the city. There may be other villages that back up onto something similar, but that we should look at that as not having a zero setback, as you know, our current zoning right now. I don't know if you are aware of this, Councilor Lucas, but there's a zero setback required to an aqueduct, for example, from a residential property. And that would not be appropriate for the Greenway. So I totally agreed with them. And I said I would fight for having a setback from the Greenway, and I will. But it's not a done deal. I just want to say that since nobody has agreed to do this yet, I'm definitely going to bring it forward to the committee and the planning department and have that conversation. And so I think we will also have that conversation. I think we brought up a few times tonight that we're looking, the planning department and UTIL are looking at ways to create a VC1 that can foster adaptive reuse. That would be that separate set of metrics that you just mentioned would have to be completely different. Because really, we just want to be able to allow multi-residents also as a way of protecting and promoting proper maintenance and care of those structures. So thank you for that, but I just felt I needed to clarify because that isn't done already. Anybody else at the table? Councilor Baker.
This is not procedural, this is actual supplement.
Okay.
Okay, I just want to reiterate as you're thinking in the department and the Arkansas is to look very carefully at the VC1 alternative. Of some of those properties are already residential. The question is, are they appropriate for redevelopment? That seems to me a key dimension of what is being thought about. Because in some cases, you're talking about taking an existing structure and breaking it up into smaller ones, like our current ordinance 30 provides, or that used to be called ordinance 30, but it's in the zoning in a different name. But there are existing structures, and so part of the question that the Newton Historic District for one point and another is because does it make sense to intensify the development on some existing residential properties? That's the threshold question that I think we still need to sort out. And most of the village center zoning, as I've heard it, has been looking at what happens in properties that are zoned commercial by and large, and as housing an appropriate way to add housing opportunity in those areas. But when you have existing residential properties, I want to look at those with a somewhat different eye and see whether in fact the change makes sense. So I'm not saying it doesn't yet. I mean, there's a whole question of as of right versus special permit and everything else that we've still got to deal with, and who does the decision making. But I'm just saying that some of the things on the map, while I understood how they were generated, didn't make sense to me, and I want to make sure, and I assume that other people have had similar conversations. Sounds like you have.
I would say that Newton Corner.
Yeah, that's what the one that I have to look at most
Yes.
carefully.
I agree that needs to be reviewed.
Yeah,
And yours.
and so
Yeah.
now it may be that that's a map drawing question rather than a change of the framework. But this gets back to the quilting question that I raised earlier, which is if this is it's going to be a challenge to do this anyway, but you have a sense of what properties in their current arrangement and in their current intensity are appropriate to stay that way. Maybe you don't
That's a
change.
knitting question.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get into culinary matters too. No, I mean,
All right.
all right, never mind. Okay.
I think there are parts of every ward with respect to VC one, VC two, and VC three that need to be examined. So I don't, I don't think it's.
I'm just using that as an.
Yeah, no, but I think that that'll be a conversation that we'll need to have.
And we should talk about how that happens from here on out. I mean, obviously, most of it's gonna happen here, but planning may be, for example, they had an in-depth conversation with the Newton Corner folks. And some of us go out to our village area council meetings or neighborhood association meetings and have those conversations in detail and can bring them back. But, you know,
Well, I think part of the question procedurally beyond this is, are we going to vote? How we vote individual sections of the ordinance? I mean, there are going to be certain.
we'll do straw votes in committee before we.
No, I
have
understand,
it,
but even
yeah.
then, when we get to the council, these are issues that may get divided and you have. This map going to pass, you know, it's going to be, we can't decide that yet, but I think it's worth at least reflecting on how the process goes to the far end. Ultimately, we're going to get to the far end of getting something.
One of the things I talked about with President Albright, but we haven't found a date in the calendar yet, is when we could possibly do a committee of the whole with the entire council. Because, you know, a presentation that's comprehensive, that takes a night where we, you know, all see the same thing at once, can ask, you know, the committee may not have as many questions as some folks who are, for example, in finance when we're meeting. So we're talking about that too. We probably want to have version 2 in front of us for a little bit of time before we do that. Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, I want to speak, but Councilor
I
Ray's
see.
had her hand up.
Oh, I see that. Yes, I just was trying to finish with
I just
Councilor.
want to comment on in a moment too.
Oh,
on what we
okay.
just talked about.
So I'll go with Councilor Wright and then Larry. Or-
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So I too,
Go ahead.
Those are good.
okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I too was at the Upper Falls meeting and I just took a quick look at the maps and there's 7 villages that VC2 or VC3 abuts a park or green space or something like that. So it's not just the Upper Falls, but there's quite a few that do have that same issue. Thank you.
Saying the Greenway is a different animal from a city park or a playground, but all deserve looking at, you know? So I take your point, though. I don't think there's another village next to a Greenway. But take your point. Councilor Ryan and then Larry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like I said last week, I think last meeting, that what Council Baker is basically saying about the quilt and all that is, I mean, I said using Newton Center, for example, the stretch of Langley Road between Center and Beacon, where we have the old church and the building beside it, and where, you know, I would be totally in favor of newer housing, maybe 4 stories, where the parking lot is. I'm just saying this for instance, to show what the quilt work would be, but I would never want to touch that church, which is now being made into apartments. But, and that's a structure that, you know, a lot of people don't even know it's been offices for years and medical offices, but I think that enhances the city by being able to put in more housing. And you know how I feel about affordable housing. I really think we got to start talking about real affordable housing, 30% AMI and below workforce housing. Like Reverend Scott was talking about, our employees being able to live here. And I think we got to really get serious about that. But in the historic districts, I agree with you. I mean, I said, my thing is with, and I think it will preserve some of the houses. I don't want anything touched. I don't want them torn down. But I do think that when some of them get too expensive to maintain, and that they should be broken up into smaller units without touching the outside and remaining the same. So that's where you gain more housing, but you keep your historic district and your historic buildings, just like the churches I'm talking about. You leave them alone, but you make the changes on the inside for the better. And I think a lot of some things like that could be better, used more for real affordable housing. And it was said tonight, and I said it again last week, and I'll keep saying, Chestnut Hill, I mean, we have the whole shopping center across the street. I know it borders right on the T station borders right on Brookline. There is some housing going up across the street, but it's actually, I'm not across Route 9 on the corner of Hammond and Route 9, but it's Brookline. But I see so much potential in that shopping center area, especially the huge part of the parking lot over on by Hammond Park, butts Hammond Pond Parkway. I've always envisioned housing there, or affordable housing there, because it's a part of the lot that's never really used. But we got to look closer at these stations that we're leaving out. And I agree, there's no reason to leave them out. I brought up Woodland the last time. Luckily, we do have that big complex there. Now it's been there for quite a while, but you know, Elliott, we can't, we have to look closer. I'm not saying it can be done, but we have to look closer so everybody has the burden. Mywood, we don't have a village center to speak of, south side of Manhattan Street, but I'm told that we're gonna deal with the corridors on another day. We have a 40B now going in Ward 8 on Chalmont and Christina, that area. And that's Ward 8, and then we're looking at another 40B on Boylston Street. And as Mr. Heath said, you know, I tell people as a counselor, I won't even see that to vote on, but you know, what I'm doing is helping to direct people to who they can talk to and to their state reps, and to get more clarity on what's being done with the project, what can be done. And I listen to people, but as far as the south side, we take a closer look. We're starting to have more projects over there, but we have no public transportation to speak of at all. And some people got to remember that the south side of Newton goes a lot further past Newton Center. Some people, I think that Newton ends around Newton Center, but it goes all the way to the West Roxbury line. And as far as public transportation out there, there's nothing. There's a bus that runs 5 days a week, that ends at 7:30 at night and doesn't run on weekends. So that's not public transportation, but and that's one of the few cross-city buses that we have. And if they didn't have it go into Dedham and Watertown, we wouldn't have that bus. And if I see it go by many times and it's empty, and it worries me because it's an excuse to get rid of it. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Councilor Ryan. Just one point on that. Jen Cairo, would you please confirm this so it's official? I wasn't sure for a while whether the lots, the huge parking lot, which is part of the street and the Star Market and all that stuff, and there's a lot of empty space there. And we did actually talk to those developers about putting housing there. I wasn't sure if those large lots would count. If they're over 30,000 square feet, we can develop them, but under special permit, and anything that requires special permit will not count toward the MBTA communities.
Yeah, that's right. They're large lots, and they're, I think, all under special permit currently. So we'd have to really get creative to come up with new zoning that would allow if you're talking about counting towards MBTA communities in particular, we'd have to really get creative, come up with zoning particular to those sites that would allow for the development of housing without a special permit and without the need to amend any existing special permits, which would be tricky.
Similar for the golf course and other large lots that, because that's right now, it's one lot, right? So from a development, that's a different matter, but.
Right.
I
On
can't,
I just want to comment on that parcel too.
okay, let's go, I've got some more hands now. So, and Counselor Leary, then Downs, then Malachi, then Baker.
But can I just say one more thing?
No, yes.
I don't talk all the
No,
time.
please go ahead.
So, we just had that brief little discussion about by right or special permit, but that's what I'm talking about. Now we're talking about it. Now we're talking about the Chestnut Hill train station. We're talking about housing, whether it can be done or not, but we're talking about it. That's it. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to say I agree with your comments about the Chestnut Hill area, and I'd love it, as long as we can also not build a parking lot right up to Hammond Pond, where we've done in the past, some protections on that. I just had to smile when you said Newton Center. Actually, there's parts of the city beyond Newton Center. I guess I lived here all my life, but oh my God, Oak Hill Park. I only discovered it like 15 years ago. I just crossed Route 9. But yeah, no, this is a big city, and there's a lot of opportunity. And actually, I originally raised my hand because when you talked about the committee of the whole, I think we need more than one. And I just remember our committee on the whole regarding sustainability issues was like speed dating. I mean, it was so much of the fire hose kind of thing. And with the complexity and the discussion, the depth, all we've gone into over all these many, not actually years now, but certainly this many months. If you're not totally paying attention or attending every exact meeting, it's going to be going to need more than one committee of the whole, I think, to really understand the zoning and the impact. So I just want, maybe we will need to plan that too.
Yep, we should probably start looking at the calendar right now, because we will be getting into budget with the committee of the whole timeline there. Okay, and so let's see. Counselor Downs, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Very interesting discussion tonight, and I agree with Councillor Ryan. There is not a lot of village center in Ward 8 unless you look at Needham Street and how that is developing, but that would be a corridor rather than a village center. Councillor Crossley, you mentioned aqueducts and village centers. And I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention that we do have an aqueduct running almost all the way through Waban Center, including areas that are in the rezoning. So if we're doing setbacks, I think we ought to think about that and think about preserving those off-road trails that are so precious to our residents. And also parts of Newton Center have some old aqueduct under them, right now mostly used as staging for the fire department, and a little bit of Tyler Terrace is in an aqueduct area. But we should think about how those are treated and whether we want to build with no setback right up against those. And I support that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So greenways like aqueducts. Yeah, an important point of conversation. Councilor Malachi.
Thank you. Quick comment and a longer comment. Regarding Village Center, or in this case, 3 abutting parks. There's an example in West Newton that I brought up during our West Newton session. If you put a 5-story building on the CVS parking lot, which I think is separately not a good idea because it would be flush against the landmarked Davis Hotel, you would be directly overshadowing the ball field at the playground there at the former Davis School. But my main comment is that I am really struck by the sort of incongruity of the discussion we had last week during the debate about PFAS and playing fields, where we constantly heard from the Parks and Rec Department how we're at capacity for playing fields. We can't possibly switch to grass because we need 3 times as many fields, and there's no place where we can acquire more land for fields. And yet here we are taking for granted that we're going to pursue the MBTA zoning, which would require us to zone by right for a 25% increase in units, which, you know, whether slow or fast, would presumably ultimately lead to a 25% increase in population. Councillor Wright has already noted that we're in the pipeline, or already approved or in the pipeline, for over a 10% increase in units. And I wish, by the way, that instead of arguing about whether she was right or not, you had just given her 30 seconds to put up that chart and you could have all looked at it. But it's as if planning is in one silo and Parks and Rec is in another silo, and we haven't resolved how we would address the recreation needs of either even a 10% growth in population, let alone a 25% growth in population. And I would like to see that discussed at some point. And I hope that when the planning department comes up with its estimate of how far the village center zoning 2.0 would go toward satisfying MBTA communities, that we might pause and discuss whether we really ought to be trying to satisfy MBTA communities, because although a majority of the council may think it's a good idea, probably does think it's a good idea, residents are asking us, when do we get a chance to weigh in on that? So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Malachy. I don't see any more hands up or people. Oh, sorry, Councillor Danberg, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to comment on the Tyler Terrace Sudbury Aqueduct issue that Councillor Downs brought up. In my recollection, we can build over, we can asphalt over the Tyler Terrace Aqueduct section, but cannot build on it, because that section of the Sudbury Aqueduct is the only section of the entire aqueduct that would allow access if they ever had to get into the aqueduct itself. And while it's not an inactive use now, they want to make sure that they keep it open as a possibility for future use if we ever need it. But all along that aqueduct, there are private houses, and we do need to look at it. And as well, that aqueduct goes into Newton Four Corners, where it runs right through, right behind Whole Foods and in that commercial area. So we need to carefully consider what kind of setbacks we want to do in that region and all along, in order to preserve the aqueduct as a passageway for all the walkers and dog walkers that use it every day.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Just comment, you're talking about the parking lot, the Star Market or the street, that's already, you know, under a special permit. And because of the need for parking, it's also where the snow storage goes. And it's also, I think, maybe DCR lane. So I'm not, or there's immediately adjacent to it.
There's a parking lot on the other side.
No,
There's a DCR piece.
There's a DCR.
That's what it is, on public land.
I'm not sure exactly where the boundary is, but it's more complex.
We looked at creating a little dog park there at one point. And there was complication because among other things, the DCR had to weigh in.
Yeah, but anyway, that's a more complicated matter.
Right.
Never mind, we can talk about it.
Okay. And I see one more hand up, Counselor Markowitz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, this is just, of all the other things to talk about tonight, I just wanted to talk about one thing, and it was at the end, because I agree with Counselor Downs, and I think Counselor Danberg. They already said it, but those aqueducts are wonderful things. They're actually, if you hike inside Newton, which you can actually do, there's an awful lot of trails in Newton. A lot of people don't know about them, but the aqueduct trail is actually one of the best. I think it goes on forever. And I would hope that we even wouldn't have to overpave too much of it, but that's a separate thing. But I think we should do everything we can to just make sure that that's actually, we know specifically that the code will protect those areas.
Thank you.
Newton conservators have walks every fall.
I bet Counselor Leary knows all of those trails and how it's.
There's the conservators put out a book. So if you join the conservators, you get that as part of your, initiation, if you will. I think there's like 24 walks.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something to do. Put it on your bucket list. It's sort of like climbing the 15 largest peaks in the world. Do all 24 walks in Newton.
We should all take a weekend and do it together in the spring.
Well, there's enough for each of us to take our own walk and then report back.
Thanks, everybody. I think that's a wrap for this evening. I see some droopy eyelids. Director Heath.
We have one more item. Do we have a reappointment?
Oh, we do. But I was going first. I haven't heard it all from Counselor Krinsman, who I'm sure is just dying to move hold on this item.
I'll move hold.
All those in favor, committee, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions. Item carries. I
My,
know,
my unblemished record is intact.
yeah. Okay, where? Here you go. I got 5 now. Okay. Item 24-23 is the reappointment of Laurie Malcolm to the Newton Upper Falls Historic District Commission by Her Honor the Mayor, term of office to expire December 24, 2025. Councilor Krinsman move approval, am I right?
I'm not in Chestnut Hill.
No,
Councilor Baker doesn't want to. I'm happy to.
Upper Falls, and I can't do it, so I need you.
Oh, I'm happy to move approval. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Abstentions, none.
We're always glad
Unanimous.
to have people from Pleasant Hill just, anywhere.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. Long night, good discussion. We got a few more long nights coming up.
Drive safely, everyone.
What happened to the utility?